Hey, what is up everyone? Today we got a pretty unique story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. Get cozy and watch till the end, guys.
Somewhere out there in the cold void between stars, on a moon that most Imperial citizens will never know exists, there is a fortress carved from black basalt. It sits beneath the pale amber glow of Saturn's rings, hidden from the galaxy at large by layers of secrecy, so thick and so old that even the highest lords of the Imperium do not speak of it openly. The air inside those halls is cold and still. The corridors echo with whispered prayers and the low hum of ancient machinery. And within those corridors walk warriors clad in silver, their armor inscribed with wards and sigils that burn with quiet psychic fire. They carry weapons that shimmer with an inner light, blades and hammers that resonate with the power of the warp itself, turned against the very entities that dwell within it. These warriors do not seek glory. They do not march in triumphant parades through the streets of grateful worlds. They do not carve their names into monuments where the common people might read them and speak of their deeds over evening meals. In fact, most citizens of the Imperium will live their entire lives, from birth to death, across dozens of generations, without ever hearing even a rumor of these warriors' existence. And if by some terrible misfortune a mortal does witness them in battle, that mortal will likely never remember the encounter at all. Their memories will be scrubbed clean by psychic hands, their minds gently, or not so gently, returned to a state of blissful ignorance. Because the truth of what these warriors fight, the truth of the enemies they face, and the darkness they hold at bay, is a truth that would shatter the sanity of anyone not specifically bred and trained to endure it. They are the Grey Knights. Chapter 6, 166 of the Adeptus Astartes, the Chamber Militant of the Ordo Malleus, the Emperor's own demon hunters, and to become one of them is to walk a path so harrowing, so unimaginably cruel in its demands, that the vast majority of those who attempt it will die screaming long before they ever see the other side. This is the story of that path. Not the sanitized version found in Imperial propaganda, because there is no propaganda about the Grey Knights. There are no recruitment posters, no stirring tales told to young boys on far-flung worlds to inspire them to volunteer. The Grey Knights do not recruit in any way that resembles the methods of other Space Marine chapters. They do not send emissaries to tribal worlds to hold tournaments of strength. They do not maintain relationships with noble houses who offer up their sons in exchange for prestige. The Grey Knights take what they need from wherever they find it, and the young souls they claim for their ranks have no say in the matter. To understand why this is necessary, to truly grasp the weight of what it means to become a Grey Knight, you first have to understand what it is they fight. And to understand that, you have to look into the darkness that sits at the heart of everything, the darkness that the Imperium of Man was built to resist, even as it pretends that darkness does not exist. The galaxy of the 41st Millennium is a place of endless war. You already know this if you have spent any time at all exploring the lore of this setting. Humanity is beset on all sides by alien races, by greenskin hordes whose collective psychic fury shakes the earth beneath their feet as they charge forward in a wall of green muscle and rusted steel, by the ancient and unknowable Aeldari, whose civilizations were old before humanity learned to kindle fire, by the soulless Necron dynasties who once ruled the stars and now awaken from their tombs of living metal to reclaim what they believe is theirs by right. These are terrible enemies, each one capable of ending entire sectors of human civilization if left unchecked. But they are enemies that can be understood. They have physical forms. They bleed. They can be killed with sufficient application of bolter fire and bayonet steel. They exist within the material universe, bound by the same laws of physics that govern the movement of stars and the fall of rain. The enemies that the Grey Knights face are something else entirely. Beyond the thin skin of reality, layered over and threaded through every atom of the material universe, there exists another realm. The Imperium calls it the immaterium, or more commonly, the warp. It is a dimension of pure psychic energy, a boiling ocean of emotion and thought given form, where the laws of physics hold no dominion and the passage of time is meaningless. The warp is not simply a void or an alternate dimension in the way that science fiction so often portrays such things. It is alive, it thinks, it hungers, and within its formless depths dwell entities of unimaginable malice and power. These are the demons, born from the collective emotions of every sentient being in the galaxy. Demons are not creatures of flesh and blood. They are fragments of concepts given consciousness, shards of rage and despair and excess and deception that have coalesced into individual beings with wills and desires of their own. They are hatred that can reach out and crush your skull. They are despair that can whisper in your ear until you turn your weapon on yourself. They are pleasure so intense and so corrupt that a single moment of exposure can reduce a strong-willed man to a drooling wreck, begging for more even as his body dissolves into nothing. At the apex of this nightmare hierarchy sit the four great powers, the chaos gods themselves. Horn, the blood god, lord of slaughter and war, who sits upon a throne of skulls and demands the spilling of blood in his name. Tsench, the changer of ways, architect of fate and master of sorcery, whose plans within plans stretch across millennia and dimensions. Nurgle, the plague father, lord of decay and entropy, who spreads his gifts of disease and pestilence with the cheerful generosity of a doting grandfather. And Slaanesh, the dark prince, born from the death screams of the Aeldari civilization, who embodies excess in all its forms and feeds on the most extreme sensations that mortal beings can experience. These gods and their demonic servants represent the single greatest threat to the survival of the human species. Not because they are powerful, though they are powerful beyond comprehension. Not because they are numerous, though their legions are functionally infinite, but because they cannot truly be destroyed. A demon that is slain in the material universe does not die. It is merely banished back to the warp, where it will reform, rebuild its strength, and return. You can kill a demon 1,000 times, and it will come back 1,001. The only thing that truly hurts a demon, the only force that can make a lasting mark upon its essence, is psychic power wielded by a soul of extraordinary purity and strength. And that, in the simplest possible terms, is why the Grey Knights exist. The Imperium has many armies. It has the Astra Militarum, billions upon billions of ordinary men and women who serve as the blunt hammer of imperial military might. It has the Adeptus Astartes, the Space Marines, or those genetically enhanced super soldiers who form the Emperor's finest fighting force. It has the Adepta Sororitas, the Sisters of Battle, warriors of faith, whose devotion to the Emperor burns so bright that it manifests as literal divine power on the battlefield. It has the Adeptus Custodes, the personal guardians of the Emperor himself, each one a work of bioengineering art that makes even a space marine look rough by comparison. All of these forces can fight demons. All of them do when circumstance demands it. But none of them were designed for it. None of them were built from the ground up, from the molecular level to the spiritual, specifically to hunt and destroy the most dangerous creatures in existence. That is what the Grey Knights are. That is what they were always meant to be. And a weapon forged specifically to fight an enemy that most of humanity does not even know exists. And the story of how they came to be, the story of their founding, is one of the most dramatic and desperate tales in all of Imperial history. It begins, as so many things in this setting begin, with betrayal. 10,000 years before the current era of the Imperium, the galaxy was a very different place. The Emperor of mankind walked among his people, not as the withered corpse bound to the golden throne that he is today, but as a living god of war and wisdom. He had created 20 sons, the Primarchs, beings of extraordinary power, who each commanded a legion of space marines numbering in the tens of thousands. Together, the Emperor and his sons had embarked on the Great Crusade, as a galaxy-spanning campaign to reunite the scattered remnants of human civilization and bring them under the protective umbrella of the Imperium. It was the greatest military undertaking in human history, and for a time, it seemed that nothing could stop its advance. But the Chaos Gods had other plans. Through manipulation, through whispered promises, and carefully cultivated resentments, the Dark Powers reached out and corrupted fully half of the Emperor's sons. The Warmaster Horus, once the brightest and most beloved of the Primarchs, became the instrument of chaos vengeance against the master of mankind. He turned his legion and 8 others against the Emperor, plunging the Imperium into a civil war of such staggering scale and brutality that the galaxy would never fully recover from its wounds. This was the Horus Heresy. And it was during the darkest hours of this conflict that the seeds of the Grey Knights were first planted. The Emperor, for all his power and foresight, had not anticipated the depth of the betrayal that the heresy represented. His own sons, his own space marines, the warriors he had created to be the defenders of humanity, had been turned against everything they were meant to protect. The imperial truth, the secular philosophy that the Emperor had promoted as a bulwark against the influence of chaos, had proven insufficient. It had not inoculated his warriors against the temptations of the dark gods. It had not prevented half of his legions from falling to corruption. And so, even as the traitor legions closed in on terror itself, even as the fate of the entire human species hung in the balance, the Emperor set in motion one final plan. On a contingency, a weapon that would endure long after he himself was gone, a force that would stand as humanity's last and best defense against the enemies that had brought his greatest creation to ruin. He turned to the one man he trusted above all others. Not a Primarch, for the Primarchs had proven fallible. Not a Space Marine, for Space Marines could be corrupted. He turned to Malkador the Sigillite, the first High Lord of Terror, the Imperial Regent, a man who had stood at the Emperor's side since before the Unification Wars that brought the fractured nations of Terra under a single banner. Malkador was a psyker of extraordinary power, a keeper of secrets and lore, and perhaps the only living being in the galaxy who understood the Emperor's vision well enough to execute this most crucial of tasks. Where the Emperor charged Malkador with a mission of overwhelming importance. He was to search the Imperium, to scour every world and every battlefield, and find men whose loyalty was beyond any possibility of question. Men whose courage was not merely admirable but absolute. Men whose strength of mind was such that even the whispered temptations of gods could not sway them from their purpose. And from these men, Malkador was to forge a new kind of warrior, one that would never fall to the darkness, one that would stand as an eternal sentinel against the nightmares of the warp. Malkador found 12 worthy champions. 4 were imperial lords and administrators, men and women of inquisitive nature and unyielding mental fortitude. These 4 would go on to lay the foundations of what would become the Inquisition. Yet the Imperium's secret police force tasked with rooting out heresy and corruption from within. But the other 8, the ones who truly matter to the story we are telling today, were Space Marines. Warriors drawn from both loyalist and traitor legions. Men who had proven their loyalty to the Emperor beyond any shadow of doubt, even when their own brothers had turned to darkness. Among these were figures whose names would eventually be forgotten by all but the most deeply initiated members of the chapter they would create. Garviel Loken, once a captain of the Lunar Wolves, who had witnessed the corruption of his own Primarch and survived to tell the tale. Tylos Rubio, a codicier of the Ultramarines, one of the first librarians to serve in the New Order. Mesa Varen, a world-eater whose hatred of what his legion had become burned hotter than any cornate rage. And others whose stories are known to only a precious few. Not all of the men that Malkador gathered would become Grey Knights. The project evolved and changed as the crisis deepened. But eventually, shortly before the Siege of Terra itself, Malcador assembled the 8 Space Marines who would become the founding Grand Masters of the new chapter. Their original identities were stripped away, their old names and allegiances buried so deep that not even the most skilled psychic interrogation could unearth them. In their place, they were given new names drawn from the mythology of ancient Terra, names that had once belonged to the legendary titans of old: Janus, Epimetheus, Chiron, Koios, Ogun, Iapto, Jotun, Satre, and 8 names for 8 warriors who would become the foundation stones of humanity's greatest weapon against the darkness. The Emperor himself surveyed these chosen few and found them worthy. And then, as the traitor legions hammered at the walls of the Imperial Palace, as the fate of everything hung by the thinnest of threads, Malcador took his 8 warriors and disappeared. He took them to Titan, Saturn's largest moon, a world of frozen methane seas and nitrogen ice plains that sat in the shadow of the ringed giant, unremarkable to anyone who did not know what lay beneath its surface. Because there, hidden under layers of rock and shielded by technologies so advanced that even the Mechanicum did not fully understand them, the Emperor had prepared a fortress, a fully stocked, fully equipped fortress monastery, complete with gene seed reserves, weapons, armor, and hundreds of thousands of raw recruits drawn from across the galaxy. Everything that would be needed to create a new chapter of Space Marines from the ground up. The gene seed stored in those vaults was unlike anything that had been used before. It was not derived from any of the 20 Primarchs. According to the most closely guarded secrets of the Grey Knights, this gene seed was engineered directly from the Emperor's own genetic material. His own unaltered, uncorrupted genetic code, distilled and refined into the biological machinery that would transform ordinary humans into something far more than Space Marines. Something that carried within its very cells the psychic resonance of the master of mankind himself. This was the Emperor's gift. Not just gene seed, but a piece of himself, a fragment of his essence woven into the biological fabric of every warrior who would carry it. It would grant them psychic abilities far beyond those of ordinary psychers. It would armor their souls against the corruption of chaos in a way that no amount of training or indoctrination alone could achieve. And it would bind them, in ways both spiritual and genetic, to the Emperor's own purpose, the eternal war against the darkness of the warp. But Malcador knew that time was running out. The traitor legions were closing in. Horus's fleet controlled vast swaths of the Sol system, and it was only a matter of time before Titan was discovered, and the entire project destroyed before it could begin. So the Sigillite performed one final act of extraordinary psychic power, perhaps the single greatest feat of sorcery that any human being other than the Emperor himself has ever accomplished. He hid Titan inside the warp, not destroyed, not transported, hidden. Malcador wrapped Saturn's moon in layers of psychic concealment, so dense and so perfectly constructed that even the Chaos Gods themselves could not perceive it. He tucked it away in a pocket of the Imperium, shielded by macrogellar fields and protected by sigillic wards of such complexity that the greatest sorcerers of the traitor legions could not have unraveled them in 1,000 years of trying. And there Titan sat, invisible and unreachable, while the final battle of the Horus heresy raged across Terra, and the Emperor sacrificed his physical existence to save humanity from his own fallen son. Malcador himself did not survive the effort, or the psychic strain of shielding Titan, combined with the burden of briefly sitting upon the golden throne in the Emperor's stead during the final confrontation with Horus, destroyed him utterly. He crumbled to dust, his mortal form unable to contain the forces he had channeled. But his work endured. His legacy lived on in the frozen halls of Titan, where Janus and the other founding Grand Masters were already beginning the work of building an army. Time moves differently in the warp. Where only years had passed in the material universe, decades had slipped away inside Titan's hidden sanctuary. When the moon finally emerged from its concealment, returning to normal space as if it had never left, and the 8 original Space Marines and their hundreds of thousands of raw recruits had been transformed into a full chapter of 1,000 battle-ready Grey Knights, fully trained, fully equipped, fully indoctrinated in the arts of demon hunting and the secrets of the warp that would be their eternal battlefield. The second founding was underway by then, the process by which the massive Space Marine legions were broken down into smaller, more manageable chapters in accordance with the newly written Codex Astartes. The Inquisition, built upon the foundations that Malcador's 4 mortal champions had laid, was already operational, and so, with quiet efficiency and absolute secrecy, the Grey Knights were slipped into the records of the Adeptus Terra as the 666th chapter of Space Marines. The number was not chosen at random. It was a deliberate reference to the number of wards and rituals that would define the Grey Knight's existence, a number that carried weight and meaning in the esoteric traditions of demon-fighting lore. Despite there being barely 400 chapters commissioned at the time, no one questioned the addition. The chaos and confusion of the second founding, the sheer volume of new chapters being created and documented, provided perfect cover. The Grey Knights appeared in the records as just another entry in a long list of newly formed chapters, unremarkable to anyone who did not know what they truly were. And just like that, the Emperor's final weapon was in place. A chapter of Space Marines like no other, hidden in plain sight within the bureaucratic labyrinth of the Imperium, are answering to no authority but the Ordo Malleus of the Inquisition and the eternal will of the Emperor himself. But having a chapter is one thing. Maintaining it across 10,000 years of constant warfare against the most dangerous enemies in existence is something else entirely. The Grey Knights were designed to endure, designed to perpetuate themselves across the millennia through a process of recruitment and training that is, even by the brutal standards of the Adeptus Astartes, almost inconceivably harsh. Because the enemies they face demand nothing less. A demon does not care how brave you are. A demon does not respect your training or your lineage or the honor of your chapter. A demon reaches into the deepest, most private corners of your soul and finds the weakness there, the fear, the doubt, at the tiny flickering flame of desire that every sentient being carries within them. And then it uses that weakness to destroy you from the inside out. To resist that, to stand before a creature born of pure emotion and refuse to be moved, requires something more than physical strength or martial skill. It requires a soul of adamantine purity, a mind that has been forged in fires so hot that every impurity has been burned away, leaving only the hardened core of absolute devotion to the Emperor and absolute rejection of everything that chaos represents. And that is where the real story begins. The story of how a boy, plucked from obscurity on some distant world, is transformed through suffering and sacrifice into one of the most powerful warriors the galaxy has ever known. The story of becoming a Grey Knight. Oh, but before we follow that boy on his journey, before we trace his footsteps through the crucible that will either make him or break him, we need to understand the place where that journey begins and ends. Because Titan is not merely a base of operations or a convenient location for a fortress. It is, in a very real sense, the spiritual heart of everything the Grey Knights are and everything they fight for. Saturn's largest moon is a world that most people in the Imperium have never heard of, and those who think of it as nothing more than an unremarkable celestial body orbiting the great ringed giant of the Sol system, which is, of course, exactly what the Grey Knights want them to think. The truth is something else entirely. Titan is the most fortified moon in the entire Sol system after Luna itself. Its surface is a wasteland of frozen methane and hydrocarbon seas, perpetually shrouded in a thick orange haze that blocks most forms of orbital surveillance. Beneath that haze, and beneath hundreds of meters of frozen crust, lies the citadel of Titan, the fortress monastery of the Grey Knights. It is a structure of such scale and complexity that it rivals the greatest constructions of the Imperium, yet it remains hidden from all but the most trusted eyes. The citadel is carved entirely from basalt, dark stone, that absorbs light and sound in equal measure, giving the interior a perpetual sense of weight and solemnity. The corridors are vast and echoing, designed for the passage of warriors in full Terminator armor, their ceilings lost in shadow far above. As the walls are hung with pennants and banners, commemorating victories and sacrifices that no one outside the chapter would recognize. Campaign names and battle honors that are recorded nowhere else, because the Grey Knights fight a war that the rest of the Imperium must never know about in detail. At the heart of the citadel lies the Hall of Champions, a central chamber so large that it could hold the entire chapter at once, though such gatherings are exceedingly rare. Most of the Grey Knights are scattered across the galaxy at any given time, deployed in small strike forces wherever the Ordo Malleus has identified a demonic threat. The Hall of Champions is where those who remain on Titan gather to celebrate their victories and honor their dead. The walls are lined with statues of ancient heroes and grand masters whose stone gazes look down upon all who enter, their silent stares speaking of heroism and sacrifice that span 10 millennia. 10,000 years of warfare against the entities of the warp are recorded on those walls, spelled out in torn and bloodied banners, in rune-encrusted skulls and the fragments of shattered blades. Each statue, each artifact, each icon represents a terrible campaign or crusade, often still stained with the residue of creatures that were banished and the blood of those who fell in the banishing. The Paladins, the chapter's greatest living warriors, frequent the hall more than any other members of the Grey Knights, meditating upon the deeds of those who came before them and steeling their resolve for the battles that lie ahead. But the Hall of Champions, impressive as it is not the most important chamber in the citadel. That distinction belongs to a place far deeper within the fortress, a place that even most Grey Knights approach with something close to reverence and dread in equal measure. The Sanctum Sanctorum, buried in the deepest levels of the citadel, guarded by wards and seals of such potency that a lesser psyker would be driven mad simply by standing too close to its doors. The Sanctum Sanctorum houses the Librarium Demonica. This is the Grey Knight's most precious and most dangerous asset, a repository of knowledge about the warp and its inhabitants that has been painstakingly assembled by the Ordo Malleus over the course of 10,000 years. The Librarium is not a pleasant place. The corridors that lead to it twist and turn in ways that do not entirely conform to the geometry of the material universe, as if the knowledge contained within has begun to warp the very fabric of reality around it. The air is thick with the scent of aged parchment and something else, something metallic and faintly electric that prickles against the skin and makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. The shelves are lined with age-worn oaken cabinets that hold crumbling scrolls, gnarled tomes bound in materials that are best not examined too closely, and tarnished blackened data crystals that glow with a faint, sickly light. Within these shelves are the true names of demons, thousands of them, tens of thousands. The true name of a demon is not simply a label, not merely a designation that allows one entity to be distinguished from another. In the metaphysics of the warp, a true name is power. It is a fundamental expression of a demon's essence, a word or phrase that encapsulates everything that creature is, every drop of its malice, every strand of its being. To know a demon's true name is to hold a weapon against it that no physical armament can match. To speak a demon's true name with psychic force behind it is to strike at the very core of its existence, to weaken its grip on reality and make it vulnerable in ways that bolter shells and power swords never could. This is why the Librarium Demonica is so heavily guarded. This is why, even within the Grey Knights, access to its deepest vaults is restricted to only the most senior and most trusted members of the chapter. Because the knowledge contained within those walls is a double-edged sword of the most dangerous kind. The same law that allows a Grey Knight to banish a demon could, in the wrong hands, be used to summon one. The same true names that serve as weapons of banishment could be spoken as invocations of binding, calling the named entity forth from the warp and into the material universe. Every Grey Knight carries a copy of the Liber Demonica, a condensed version of the essential tenets contained within the Librarium. It is worn in a ceramite case on the warrior's breastplate, close to his chest, close to his heart. The book itself is a work of extraordinary craftsmanship, its pages illuminated in silver and bound to a spine carved from the thigh bone of a martyred saint. But it is more than a book. And it is a psychic talisman of considerable power, a focus for the warrior's psychic abilities, and a source of strength in the darkest moments of battle. To open its pages is to access a wealth of tactical information, demon lore, and words of power that can turn the tide of an engagement against the most terrible of foes. The Liber Demonica contains everything a Grey Knight needs to know about his duty. It discusses tactics for fighting different types of demons, outlines the rituals of banishment and purification that are central to the chapter's operations, and even includes extensive discourse on when it is necessary to terminate allies who have been compromised by chaos corruption. It does not shy away from the harsh realities of the Grey Knight's mission, when it does not pretend that the war against demons can be fought without cost or without making decisions that would horrify anyone who has not been trained to make them. Beyond the Sanctum Sanctorum and the halls of the living, there is another part of Titan that carries its own solemn weight. The Dead Fields. Some distance from the main fortress, out on the frozen plains of Titan's surface, lies the burial ground of the Grey Knights. It is here that the chapter's fallen are laid to rest, their bodies interred beneath the cold earth of the moon they served. The burial process is itself a ritual of extraordinary significance. Before a Grey Knight is laid to rest, the 666 words of sanctity are written along his body, each word a ward against the possibility that the demon-tainted knowledge the warrior carried in life might somehow persist after death. His gene seed is harvested by the chapter's apothecaries, carefully preserved for future generations. His equipment, his weapons and armor are recovered and recycled, cleaned and reconsecrated before being passed to the next recruit who will carry them into battle. This is a detail that might seem minor, but it speaks to something fundamental about the Grey Knight's philosophy. These warriors do not cling to material possessions. They do not maintain personal arsenals or customized equipment handed down through bloodlines. Every piece of war gear a Grey Knight carries has been worn by others before him, wielded by hands that are now dust and bone in the dead fields. The weapons carry the residual psychic impressions of their previous bearers, faint echoes of battles fought and demons banished. When a new Grey Knight takes up a nemesis force weapon for the first time, he is not simply arming himself. He is joining a chain of guardianship that stretches back thousands of years, adding his own link to a legacy that will endure long after he himself has returned to the frozen earth of Titan. This is a uniquely Grey Knight perspective. Unlike other Space Marine chapters, the Grey Knights do not view the interment of mortally wounded brothers within Dreadnought chassis as an honor. Where other chapters see Dreadnought service as a glorious continuation of a warrior's duty, the Grey Knights view it as something closer to a burden. Every Grey Knight desires, upon his death, to be brought to the crypts beneath the temple of the Emperor on Titan and laid to rest with his brothers. To be sealed within a dreadnought, to be denied that final peace, is considered a weight that is accepted only when absolutely necessary. As a result, Grey Knight dreadnoughts are extremely rare compared to those of other chapters, and those that do exist are awakened only in the most dire of circumstances. The Citadel is also home to several other locations of significance. The Chamber of Trials, a forbidding keep set alongside the main bulk of the fortress, is where aspirants arrive and their training begins, if they survive. It is from this chamber that the gatherers set out across the galaxy in search of new blood for the chapter, and it is to this chamber that they return with their harvest of young psychers, plucked from worlds that will never know the fate of their lost children. The Cloister of Sorrows was once a place of contemplation, open to Titan's sky with its atmosphere contained within invisible electromagnetic fields, so that the great eye of the galaxy could look down upon the Grey Knights as they meditated on the nature of their enemy and the weight of their duty. Whether it still serves this purpose in the current era is uncertain, but the name alone suggests the emotional toll that the Grey Knight's mission exacts upon even the most hardened of its warriors. Then there is the Apex Cronus Bastion, a void station the size of a small moon that orbits Titan and serves as one of the most formidable star fortresses in the Imperium, as it is rumored to surpass even the Imperial Fist's mighty warship Phalanx in terms of raw firepower, a claim that speaks to the extraordinary resources that the Inquisition has channeled into the defense of Titan and the protection of its secrets. And in the Archivum Titanis, the battlefield reports of every action conducted by the Grey Knights across the galaxy are stored and catalogued. 10,000 years of war records, tactical analyses, demon encounter reports, and after-action assessments, all meticulously maintained by the chapter's archivists. It is from this vast repository of information that the Grey Knights draw the tactical doctrine and strategic insight that allows them to fight an enemy that is, by its very nature, almost impossible to predict. Titan is, in summary, more than a fortress. It is a world unto itself, and a self-contained civilization devoted entirely to a single purpose: the identification, confrontation, and destruction of demonic threats to the Imperium of man. Every stone of its construction, every corridor, every chamber, every ward and seal and sigil has been designed and maintained with that purpose in mind. It is the anvil upon which Grey Knights are forged, the harbour to which they return between storms, and the tomb in which they are laid to rest when their war is finally done. Now that you understand the place, let us talk about how young souls are found and brought there. Because the first step on the path to becoming a Grey Knight is not a test of strength or a trial of combat. It is a moment of selection, a moment when the hand of the chapter reaches out across the void and plucks a boy from everything he has ever known, and dragging him into a future that he cannot imagine and did not choose. The Grey Knights recruit differently from every other chapter of Space Marines in the Imperium. Most chapters maintain relationships with specific worlds, sometimes their home world, sometimes a group of recruiting planets whose populations have been identified as genetically compatible with the chapter's gene seed. These chapters send representatives to these worlds, hold trials of strength and endurance, and select the most promising candidates from among the young men who present themselves.
Honestly, if I can just step back for a second here and give you my own take on this, the Grey Knights are one of those factions that I think Games Workshop has handled almost perfectly from a narrative standpoint. Because on paper they sound like they should be boring, right? They are the good guys who never fall, who never turn traitor, who always win in the end. That should make them the least interesting chapter in the entire setting, but it does not. And the reason it doesn't is because the writers understood that the tragedy of the Grey Knights is not about whether they will fall to chaos. It is about what they lose by never failing. The memories, the identity, the humanity that gets chipped away piece by piece across centuries of service. This is what makes them compelling to me. They pay for their purity with everything else. And I think that is a far more interesting story than just another tale about corruption. But anyway, that's just my take. Let's go back to the video.
There is, in most cases, at least a veneer of choice involved. A boy might volunteer, or be selected by his family, or win the right to attempt the trials through some form of local competition. The Grey Knights have no such process. They do not maintain recruiting worlds. Then they do not hold public trials. They do not accept volunteers. Instead, they rely on a cadre of specialized operatives known as the Gatherers. The Gatherers are Grey Knights who have been rendered unfit for frontline combat by age or injury, but whose keen senses and powerful minds remain sharp enough to detect what they are looking for, the psychic signature of a potential aspirant. They operate in the deepest secrecy, moving through the population of the Imperium like ghosts, scanning the teeming billions of humanity for that rare, precious spark of psychic potential that marks a soul as suitable for the Grey Knight's purposes. Many of their recruits are drawn from the Black Ships, the dreaded vessels of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica that traverse the Imperium collecting psychers for the Emperor's various purposes. The black ships are already engaged in the business of identifying and gathering psychically gifted individuals, tithing them from their homeworlds and transporting them to Terra for processing. Most of these psychers will be fed into the Astronomicon, their psychic energy consumed to maintain the great psychic beacon that allows warp travel across the Imperium. Others will be trained as astropaths, the psychic communicators who form the backbone of interstellar communication. A rare few will be identified as having potential for other purposes. It is from among this latter group that the gatherers most often select their candidates. The gatherers board the black ships in the guise of inquisitorial agents, which in a sense they are, and conduct their own clandestine assessments of the psychers being transported. But they are looking for something specific, something that goes beyond raw psychic power. They are looking for purity, for resilience, for a quality of soul that is almost impossible to define, but immediately recognizable to those who know what to look for. A light that burns steady and clean in the darkness of the warp, undimmed by the shadows that press in on all sides. But the black ships are not the only source of recruits. The gatherers have also drawn potential aspirants from untithed psychers on worlds beyond imperial rule, from feral worlds considered off-limits to ordinary imperial citizens, and from any other source that yields individuals of sufficient promise. The chapter will go wherever it must to find what it needs, and it will take what it finds without asking permission from anyone. In recent millennia, and particularly since the formation of the Great Rift that has torn the galaxy in two, the Grey Knights have faced increasing difficulty in maintaining their numbers. The loss of many black ships to warp storms and demonic attack has reduced the flow of potential recruits to a trickle. The chapter has been forced to resort to increasingly desperate measures, including attacking other imperial institutions and even other Space Marine chapters to seize recruits with psychic potential before hiding all evidence of their actions. This desperation speaks to the critical importance of the Grey Knight's mission and the terrible consequences that would follow if the chapter were ever to fall below the strength needed to fulfill its purpose. When a suitable candidate is identified, the gatherer makes contact and the boy is taken. There is no ceremony, no farewell, no explanation given to the family or community that the boy is leaving behind. One day he is there, living whatever life he was living, and the next he is gone, spirited away to a destination that no one he has ever known will ever learn about. His name will be forgotten. His family will be left to wonder what became of their son, their brother, their friend. And the boy himself will, if he survives what comes next, eventually forget them in turn. This is where the path truly begins to narrow, because being selected is not an accomplishment. It is not a reward. It is the beginning of a process so grueling, so relentlessly punishing, that the overwhelming majority of those who enter it will not survive to see its completion. The training fields of Titan are carpeted with the bones of failed aspirants. This is not metaphor. This is not exaggeration. The bones are there, bleached white by the cold and the thin atmosphere, a visible reminder to every new arrival of what awaits those who are found wanting. The aspirant is brought to the chamber of trials, that forbidding keep on the edge of the main citadel, and from the moment he crosses its threshold, his old life is over. Everything he was, everything he knew, everything he believed about himself and his place in the universe, all of it is about to be stripped away, examined, tested, and either proven worthy or discarded. There is no middle ground. There is no partial success. You either emerge from the chamber of trials as a candidate worthy of further investment, or you do not emerge at all. The trials that await inside that chamber are the stuff of nightmares. They are designed not merely to test the aspirant's physical endurance or martial skill, though both of those qualities will be tested to their absolute limits. The primary purpose of the trials is to examine the aspirant's soul, to probe the deepest recesses of his psyche and determine whether the light that burns within him is truly strong enough to withstand the darkness that he will be asked to face. Because the enemies that a Grey Knight fights do not attack the body first. They attack the mind. They attack the spirit. They find the cracks in a warrior's psychological armor and drive wedges of temptation and despair into those cracks until the warrior's sense of self crumbles like rotten wood. To survive that kind of assault, an aspirant must possess a quality that goes beyond courage. He must have an absolute, as unshakable core of identity that cannot be corrupted, cannot be tempted, cannot be broken. The trials are designed to find that core, or to prove that it does not exist. There are 666 of these trials in total. They are called the Rituals of Detestation, and each one is a test of a different aspect of the aspirant's character, psyche, and spiritual integrity. The exact nature of each ritual is one of the Grey Knight's most closely guarded secrets, known only to those who have undergone them and survived. What is known, from the fragmentary accounts that have filtered through the lore, is that they are the most horrifying experiences that any human being can be subjected to without being killed outright. Some of the trials are physical. The aspirant is pushed to the absolute limits of his body's endurance. They are subjected to pain and deprivation that would kill an ordinary human several times over. Remember, these are boys who have not yet received any of the genetic enhancements that will eventually transform them into space marines. They are still baseline humans, albeit humans with extraordinary psychic potential. The physical trials test whether their bodies can withstand the stresses that the gene seed implantation process will impose upon them, and whether their minds can maintain focus and clarity even when their bodies are screaming for mercy. Other trials are psychic. The aspirant is exposed to the influence of the warp in controlled conditions, subjected to visions and temptations that are carefully calibrated to probe every weakness, every vulnerability, every hidden desire and secret fear that lurks in the depths of his subconscious. Demons are, in some accounts, directly involved in these trials, summoned and bound by the chapter's most powerful psykers to serve as living tests of the aspirant's resistance to corruption. The boy must face these entities, feel the full weight of their malice and seduction, and emerge with his soul intact. Still other trials are designed to test the aspirant's moral and psychological resilience. He may be presented with impossible choices, scenarios in which every option leads to suffering, and there is no clean path forward. He may be isolated for extended periods, left alone with his thoughts and his fears, in environments designed to break down the barriers between consciousness and the warp. He may be forced to witness horrors that defy description, things that would drive an unprepared mind into permanent madness, and demonstrate that he can process those horrors without being consumed by them. The most advanced bioengineering and psychosurgery available to the Imperium is utilized throughout this process, not to make it easier, but to ensure that the trials are as penetrating and as thorough as possible. The tech priests and apothecaries who oversee the process use every tool at their disposal to peer into the aspirant's mind and soul, looking for any trace, any hint, any microscopic flaw that might one day provide an opening for demonic corruption. Most aspirants fail. The numbers vary depending on the source, but the general consensus is that for every aspirant who successfully completes the 666 rituals of detestation, hundreds or even thousands die in the attempt. The training fields of Titan are, as noted, carpeted with their remains. The trials are specifically designed to be fatal if failed. There is no option to try again, no consolation for those who fall short. The stakes are absolute because the consequences of allowing a flawed candidate to proceed are absolute. A single Grey Knight who falls to corruption could compromise the entire chapter, could potentially give the enemies of the warp access to the most dangerous repository of demonic lore in the galaxy. The Grey Knights cannot afford to take that risk, and so they accept the terrible cost of their recruiting process as a necessary evil. For those who do survive, who pass through all 666 rituals and emerge on the other side still sane, still pure, still burning, with that steady inner light that first drew the gatherer's attention, a reward of sorts awaits. But it is a reward that comes with its own terrible price. Upon successful completion of the trials, the aspirant's memories are erased, not partially, not selectively. The majority of everything the aspirant has ever experienced, every memory of home and family, every childhood friendship, every moment of joy and sorrow that made up the first years of his life, all of it is stripped away through a combination of psychic surgery and chemical conditioning. The boy who entered the chamber of trials ceases to exist in every meaningful sense. What remains is a blank slate, a vessel purified by suffering and prepared to receive the gifts that will transform him from a human child into something far more. This erasure serves multiple purposes. On a practical level, it eliminates potential vulnerabilities. Yes, a grey knight who remembers his mother's face is a grey knight who could be manipulated by a demon wearing that face. A grey knight who recalls the warmth of his childhood home is a grey knight who might hesitate when asked to burn a similar home to ashes in the name of purification. By stripping away these memories, the chapter removes the emotional leverage that demons most commonly exploit. But there is a deeper purpose as well. The erasure of identity is, in a sense, a death and a rebirth. The boy dies so that the warrior can be born. The old self is sacrificed so that the new self, a self forged in the fires of the most demanding trials in the galaxy, can take its place. It is a transformation as complete and as irreversible as any physical metamorphosis. And it is considered by the Grey Knights to be as essential to the creation of a demon hunter as the surgical implantation of gene seed organs. The aspirant is assigned a number, not a name, a number. He will be known by this designation throughout the remainder of his training, stripped of even the basic human dignity of a personal identity. Only upon the completion of his training, when he has proven himself worthy of joining the chapter's line brotherhoods, will he be given a new name. And that name will not be a name in the way that you or I understand the concept. It will be something far more significant. Every Grey Knight's name is a fragment of magical lore, a specific combination of sounds and syllables that acts in perfect opposition to the true name of a particular demon. Just as a demon's true name is a weapon that can be used against it, a Grey Knight's name is a shield and a sword rolled into one, a word of power that resonates with the forces of banishment and purification. Even a Grey Knight's name is a weapon against the enemies he was created to fight. This is the level of thoroughness that defines the Grey Knight's approach to their mission. Nothing is left to chance. Nothing is considered too small or too insignificant to be weaponized against the darkness. From the sigils carved into their armor, to the words of their names, to the prayers they whisper before battle, every aspect of a Grey Knight's existence is calibrated for a single purpose: the destruction of demons and the protection of humanity from the corrupting influence of the warp. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. The aspirant has survived the trials. His memories have been erased. He stands on the threshold of transformation, a blank slate awaiting the gifts that will make him superhuman. What comes next is the process of creation itself, the surgical and genetic procedures that will take an ordinary human boy and rebuild him from the cellular level up into a Grey Knight of the Adeptus Astartes. The creation of a space marine is, under any circumstances, one of the most complex and dangerous medical procedures in the Imperium. The process involves the implantation of 19 specialized organs, each one grown from the chapter's gene seed, each one designed to enhance a specific aspect of the recipient's biology. These organs interact with each other in complex ways, and the failure of any single implant can compromise the functioning of all the others. The process takes years to complete, with each organ being implanted at a specific stage of the recruit's physical development, and each implantation followed by extensive periods of recovery and conditioning. For the Grey Knights, this already harrowing process is even more demanding. Because the gene seed of the Grey Knights is unlike that of any other chapter, it is not derived from one of the 20 Primarchs, those demigod sons of the Emperor, whose genetic material formed the basis for every other chapter's biological heritage. The Grey Knight's gene seed comes from the Emperor himself, his own unaltered genetic code preserved and replicated across 10,000 years of unbroken biological continuity. This means that every Grey Knight carries within his body a direct genetic link to the master of mankind. Not diluted through a Primarch intermediary, not filtered through thousands of generations of replication and potential mutation. Direct, pure, undiluted. This genetic connection is what gives the Grey Knights their extraordinary psychic abilities, their near-absolute resistance to chaos corruption, and their unique status within the Imperium's military hierarchy. The implantation process for a Grey Knight aspirant follows the same general sequence as for other Space Marines, but with several critical additions. The standard 19 organs are implanted, each one carrying the Emperor's genetic signature rather than that of a Primarch. The secondary heart, the os modular that strengthens the skeleton, and the biscopea that increases muscle mass, the hemastomen that enhances the blood, the Laraman's organ that allows for rapid clotting, the catalepsian node that allows the warrior to remain awake for extended periods, the preomnor that renders him immune to most poisons, the omophagia that allows him to absorb genetic information from consumed flesh, the multi-lung that filters toxins from the air, the oculobe that enhances vision, the Lyman's ear that improves hearing and balance, the Susan membrane that allows suspended animation, the ulitic kidney that filters extreme toxins, the neuroglottis that provides chemical analysis through taste, the mucranoid that produces a protective waxy coating, the Betcher's gland that allows the warrior to spit corrosive venom, the progenoid glands that produce new gene seed for future generations, and the black carapace that interfaces with power armor. All of these are implanted according to a strict schedule, each one monitored and tested to ensure proper integration. But beyond these standard implants, Grey Knight aspirants undergo additional modifications that are unique to their chapter. Silver purity wards are implanted beneath the recruit's skin, covering his entire body in a subcutaneous lattice of protective sigils. These wards are not merely symbolic. They are psychically charged barriers that provide an additional layer of defense against warp-born corruption, complementing the psychic defenses that the warrior's own mind generates. The sensation of having these wards implanted is reportedly excruciating, as a burning that penetrates to the very bone as the silver is threaded through tissue and muscle in intricate patterns that mirror the wards carved into the Grey Knight's armor and weapons. The physical transformation wrought by the gene seed implantation is dramatic and irreversible. An aspirant who began the process as a boy of perhaps 12 or 13 standard years will emerge, years later, as a warrior standing over 2 meters tall. His muscles are vastly enhanced, capable of feats of strength that would be impossible for any unaugmented human. His bones are reinforced with ceramite-laced ossification that makes them nearly unbreakable. His reflexes are sharpened to a degree that allows him to react to threats faster than the eye can follow. His senses are enhanced across the board, his vision sharper, his hearing more acute, and his sense of smell and taste refined to the point where he can detect chemical compounds and biological agents that would be invisible to normal human perception. His twin hearts beat in synchronized rhythm, one primary and one secondary, providing redundant circulation that can sustain him even if one heart is destroyed. His enhanced lungs can filter toxins from the air and allow him to survive in environments that would kill an ordinary human in seconds. His blood clots almost instantly, sealing wounds that would be fatal to anyone else. He can go for weeks without sleep, his catalepsian node allowing portions of his brain to rest while the remainder stays alert. He can survive in the vacuum of space for limited periods. He can eat almost anything, his preomnor rendering even the most poisonous substances harmless. In short, he is no longer human, not in any biological sense that would be recognized by the Adeptus Mechanicus geneticists. He is something more, something greater, something that stands on the boundary between human and something else entirely, a bridge between the mortal world and the divine purpose that the Emperor intended for his finest warriors. But for a Grey Knight, the physical transformation is only part of the story. In many ways, it is the lesser part. Because what truly sets a Grey Knight apart from every other Space Marine in the galaxy is not his body, it is his mind. Every Grey Knight is a Psyker. This is not optional. This is not a specialization that some Grey Knights pursue, while others focus on more conventional forms of warfare. Every single battle brother in the entire chapter possesses psychic abilities of extraordinary potency. In most other Space Marine chapters, Psykers are a rarity, segregated into the Librarius, and regarded with a mixture of respect and unease by their non-psychic brethren. In the Grey Knights, psychic ability is the baseline. It is the foundation upon which everything else is built. The psychic training that a Grey Knight aspirant undergoes is, if anything, even more demanding than the physical trials he has already endured. Because psychic power, for all its incredible utility, is also incredibly dangerous. Every time a Psyker reaches into the warp to draw upon its energies, he opens a conduit between the material universe and the realm of demons. Every psychic act is, in a very real sense, an invitation to the entities of the warp to notice the Psyker and attempt to exploit that connection. For an untrained or insufficiently protected Psyker, using his abilities is like swimming in shark-infested waters with an open wound. The predators will come, drawn by the scent of psychic energy, and they will attempt to consume or corrupt the Psyker who dared to enter their domain. The Grey Knights have developed psychic disciplines and defensive techniques specifically designed to mitigate this risk. The most important of these is known as the Aegis. The Aegis is not a single technique or ability. It is a comprehensive psychic defense system that permeates every aspect of a Grey Knight's existence. At its most basic level, the Aegis is a halo of protective psychic energy that each Grey Knight maintains around himself at all times. There's a barrier of pure willpower and faith that repels demonic influence and makes the warrior's very presence painful and debilitating to creatures of the warp. But the Aegis extends far beyond personal protection. It is woven into the Grey Knight's armor, integrated into their weapons, embedded in the very architecture of their fortress monastery and their warships. A neophyte is taught in the very earliest stages of his training to imprison his soul in a cage of faith and contempt for chaos, where no demon could reach it. This sounds simple when stated in such blunt terms, but the reality of achieving it is anything but. The aspirant must learn to maintain a constant state of psychic vigilance, a background hum of protective willpower that never wavers, never falters, never drops even for a fraction of a second. Because a demon needs only a fraction of a second, a single moment of weakness, a single crack in the psychic armor, and the entity will pour through like water through a breach in a dam, overwhelming the warrior's defenses and consuming his soul before he can even scream. The prayers of willpower that the Grey Knights are taught are so potent, so mentally demanding, that some recruits are driven mad by the training alone. Their minds simply cannot sustain the level of psychic discipline required, and they shatter like glass under the pressure. These unfortunates are treated with as much compassion as the chapter's grim pragmatism allows, but there is no cure for a mind broken by psychic training. They are granted the Emperor's mercy, and their remains are added to the bone fields of Titan. Another silent testament to the price of the Grey Knight's eternal war. The Aegis armor that every Grey Knight wears is not simply physical protection. The power armor is laced with a psychic matrix, a network of psycho-conductive filaments and amulets that have been anointed, inscribed with prayers and wards, ritually consecrated and psychically charged. This matrix works in tandem with the warrior's own psychic abilities, amplifying his defenses and extending them to encompass his immediate surroundings. The combined effect of the Aegis and the armor's built-in protections creates a zone of psychic resistance around each Grey Knight that is hostile to demons. Warp-spawned creatures that enter this zone find their connection to the Imperium weakened, their ability to manifest and sustain their physical forms compromised, and their psychic attacks blunted and diffused. The phenomenon known as the shrouding is a related effect. The psychically charged nature of the Aegis armor causes it to emit a field of psychic interference, that confounds the perception of anyone or anything that observes the Grey Knight. To mortal eyes, a Grey Knight in full armor appears indistinct and hard to focus on, his outline blurred and his features difficult to discern. To demonic senses, the effect is far more pronounced. The Grey Knight appears as a blazing pillar of psychic light, painful to perceive and difficult to engage directly. Beyond the Aegis, Grey Knights are trained in a variety of offensive and defensive psychic disciplines that form the core of their combat doctrine. The Sanctic discipline encompasses the chapter's most sacred and powerful psychic techniques, many of which are specifically designed for use against demonic entities. These include abilities that allow a Grey Knight to project bolts of purifying psychic energy, to create barriers of warp-repelling force, to teleport himself and his allies across the battlefield through brief passages through the warp, and to channel the collective psychic strength of his brothers into devastating combined attacks. The hammer hand technique, for example, allows a Grey Knight to infuse his physical strikes with such concentrated psychic force that even a glancing blow can shatter bone and rupture organs. The Gate of Infinity opens a brief portal through the warp, allowing the Psyker to instantaneously relocate himself or allies to another point on the battlefield, most appearing from nowhere like silver ghosts to strike at an enemy's most vulnerable point. And the most devastating of all, the Rite of Vortex of Doom, tears open a swirling wound in the fabric of reality itself, creating a miniature warp rift that consumes everything in its immediate vicinity, dragging matter and energy into the Imperium with irresistible force. These are not abilities that can be activated with a simple thought or a snap of the fingers. Each one requires intense concentration, precise psychic manipulation, and the mental discipline to channel warp energy through the warrior's body without being corrupted or destroyed by it in the process. A Grey Knight who loses control of a psychic ability mid-use risks not only his own life, but the lives of everyone around him. For an uncontrolled warp conduit is an open invitation for every demon in the vicinity to come pouring through into the material world. The training process for these abilities is long, painful, and frequently fatal. Aspirants who have survived the 666 rituals of detestation and the gene seed implantation process are still far from complete. They must spend additional years learning to control and direct their psychic abilities, mastering techniques that require a level of mental discipline that most human beings could not achieve in a lifetime of dedicated practice. They must learn to maintain their psychic defenses even while engaged in close combat, even while wounded, even while surrounded by enemies whose very presence is designed to erode their concentration and willpower. Yet they must learn the prayers and litanies that form the verbal component of many Grey Knight psychic techniques. These are not merely words spoken for psychological comfort. They are structured sequences of sound that interact with the warrior's psychic output in specific ways, shaping and directing his power along channels that maximize its effectiveness while minimizing the risk of warp contamination. The prayers are drawn from the Liber Demonica and from the chapter's own accumulated lore, refined and perfected over 10,000 years of continuous warfare against the entities of the warp, and they must learn to work in concert with their brothers. The Grey Knights make use of a psychic technique known as the egregore, a shared psychic link that connects every member of a squad or force into a single, unified consciousness. Through the egregore, Grey Knights can communicate instantaneously and silently, sharing tactical information, coordinating their movements, and synchronizing their psychic output to devastating effect. A squad of Grey Knights linked through an egregore is far more than the sum of its parts. They think as one, move as one, fight as one, their individual psychic abilities amplified and harmonized into a collective force that can shatter the most powerful demonic entities. This training takes years. By the time a recruit has completed his psychic conditioning and is deemed ready to join a line brotherhood, he has spent the better part of a decade or more in constant, intensive preparation. He has been physically transformed, psychically awakened, spiritually purified, and tactically trained to a standard that exceeds that of any other warrior in the Imperium. And yet, in many ways, his real education has only just begun. Because the classroom of a Grey Knight is the battlefield itself, and the lessons taught there are written in blood and fire and the screaming of demons being torn from reality. Let us talk about the weapons and armor that make a Grey Knight the most lethal demon-hunting force in the galaxy. Because while psychic power and spiritual purity are the Grey Knight's most important assets, the tools they carry into battle are no less remarkable. The standard armament of a Grey Knight consists of three primary elements: the Aegis armor, the wrist-mounted Stormbolter, and the Nemesis Force weapon. Each of these is a masterwork of Imperial technology, crafted by the finest artisans of Mars and the Grey Knight's own forge masters, specifically designed for the unique demands of demon-hunting warfare. We have already discussed the Aegis armor in some detail, but it is worth emphasizing that the armor is not merely protective equipment. It is an extension of the warrior's psychic capabilities, a tool that amplifies and focuses his abilities in ways that naked flesh and bone could never achieve. The inscriptions on its surface are not decorative. Each one is a functioning ward, a psychic circuit that channels energy in specific patterns designed to repel and confuse demonic entities. The seals and purity markers attached to the armor's surface are charged with psychic energy during the consecration process, thus turning them into miniature psychic batteries that provide a constant low-level emanation of anti-demonic force. For the chapter's elite warriors, including paladins, grandmasters, and those battle brothers assigned to Terminator squads, the Aegis armor takes the form of tactical dreadnought armor, commonly known as Terminator armor. This is the heaviest personal armor available to the Adeptus Astartes, a sealed environmental suit of such protective capability that it allows the wearer to operate in the most hostile environments imaginable, from the vacuum of space to the interior of a burning building to the psychically saturated environment of a full-scale demonic incursion. Grey Knight Terminator armor is even more heavily warded than the standard variant. Its psycho-conductive matrix expanded and intensified to provide maximum protection against warp-borne threats. The indomitable core of the Grey Knight's fighting forces are their Terminator armored battle brothers. When enough of these heavily equipped warriors gather, their combined strength and resilience can match hosts of enemies many times their number. Incoming fire clatters harmlessly from blessed and warded Terminator plate, while hostile sorcery dwindles to nothing before the Grey Knight's combined Aegis. In return, the hulking Templars of Titan maintain unceasing firepower and banishing rites that winnow the enemy's ranks before their inevitable and overwhelming charge crashes home. Though surrounded by screaming foes, the Grey Knights hack a relentless path ever deeper with their nemesis weapons singing in their fists. Are unstoppable, relentless, they press forward to shatter diabolical rites, seal warp gates, slay possessed tyrants, and carve the will of the Emperor into the flesh of their foes. The wrist-mounted Stormbolter is a uniquely Grey Knight weapon configuration. Where other Space Marines carry their bolters in their hands, Grey Knights mount theirs on their forearms, leaving both hands free to wield their Nemesis Force weapons in close combat. The Stormbolter is a double-barreled variant of the standard Astartes bolt gun, capable of laying down a withering hail of fire without compromising the warrior's ability to engage in melee. Grey Knights often load their Stormbolters with Cybolts, silver-tipped, psychically charged shells that glow with an eerie blue light when fired. Each bolt becomes imbued with a portion of the warrior's own psychic power, causing it to strike with significantly greater force than an ordinary round, and inflicting damage on a demon's spiritual essence, as well as its physical form. But the most iconic weapon of the Grey Knights, the weapon that defines the chapter's identity more than any other piece of war gear, is the Nemesis Force weapon. Every Grey Knight carries a Nemesis Force weapon into battle. It may take the form of a sword, a halberd, a hammer, a pair of falchions, or a warding stave, depending on the warrior's preferences and the demands of the mission at hand. But regardless of its specific form, every Nemesis Force weapon shares certain fundamental characteristics that make it one of the most devastating personal melee weapons in the entire galaxy. A Nemesis Force weapon is not simply a power weapon with a fancier designation. It is a complex fusion of advanced Imperial technology and arcane psychic engineering. The blade, or head, or shaft of the weapon contains an intricate network of psychoconductive circuitry that channels and amplifies the wielder's psychic energy, projecting it through the weapon in a focused beam of killing force. When a psyker strikes with a Nemesis Force weapon, the blow carries not just the physical impact of the weapon itself, but a burst of psychic energy that can shatter wards, disrupt demonic manifestations, and tear apart the spiritual essence of warp-spawned creatures. The craftsmanship involved in creating a Nemesis Force weapon is extraordinary. Each weapon is individually forged by the Grey Knight's own forge masters or by the most skilled Magi of Mars, a process that takes months or even years and involves countless blessings, consecrations, and psychic attunements. The finished weapon is a unique artifact, carrying the psychic imprint of its maker and resonating with the specific frequency of its wielder's psychic output. A Nemesis Force weapon that has been psychically attuned to its bearer is vastly more effective than one that has not, which is why Grey Knights develop deep bonds with their weapons over decades and centuries of shared service. The different variants of the Nemesis Force weapon each offer distinct advantages. The Nemesis Force sword is the most versatile, offering a balance of offense and defense that makes it suitable for a wide range of combat situations. The Nemesis Force halberd provides greater reach, allowing the warrior to strike at enemies before they can close to melee range. The Nemesis Demon Hammer combines the crushing impact of a traditional thunder hammer with the psychic amplification of the Nemesis circuitry, delivering blows of such devastating force that few entities, mortal or demonic, can survive them. The Nemesis Falchions, paired short blades wielded one in each hand, sacrifice reach for speed, allowing the warrior to deliver a rapid succession of psychically charged strikes that can overwhelm an enemy's defenses through sheer volume of attacks. And the Nemesis Warding Stave, with its integrated refractor field generators, provides enhanced protection against both physical and psychic attacks, making it the preferred weapon of those Grey Knights who prioritize defense and can prime the stave with a charge of psychic energy to project a zone of protective force. Beyond the standard armament, Grey Knights have access to a range of specialized weapons designed for specific tactical situations. The Psy Cannon is a heavy weapon that fires bolts of concentrated psychic energy, capable of punching through demonic wards and physical armor alike. It is one of the very few ranged weapons in the Imperium capable of reliably harming a fully manifested demon at range. The Incinerator projects a stream of psychically charged flame that is particularly effective against large numbers of lesser demons, its holy fire burning through the warp stuff of their bodies with terrible efficiency. And the Silencer fires a rapid stream of psychic bolts that strip the warp energy from a demon's physical manifestation, causing it to lose cohesion and fade back into the immaterium. For the most extreme threats, those occasions when even a squad of Terminator-armored Grey Knights is insufficient to the task, the chapter deploys the Nemesis Dreadknight. This is a massive suit of mechanized armor, towering over even dreadnoughts, designed specifically for the purpose of engaging greater demons in single combat. A greater demon is one of the most powerful individual entities that can exist in the material universe, a creature of such immense psychic and physical power that entire armies have been known to break and flee at the mere sight of one. To fight such a creature requires a weapon of extraordinary capabilities. And the Nemesis Dreadknight is exactly that. Piloted by a single Grey Knight who is hardwired into the machine's systems through a neural interface, the Dreadknight combines the warrior's psychic abilities with the mechanical strength and firepower of a walking war engine. Its massive Nemesis Doomfists can crush a battle tank with a single blow, and the Nemesis Greatsword it can carry is large enough to bisect a greater demon with a single swing. The Dreadknight is not a subtle weapon. It is a statement of intent, a declaration that no matter how powerful the enemy becomes, the Grey Knights will find a way to match it, blow for blow. One might be tempted to think, hearing all of this, that the Grey Knights are invincible. That with their psychic might, their blessed armor, their devastating weapons and their unbreakable will, and no force in the galaxy could stand against them. But that would be a dangerous assumption, and the history of the chapter is filled with reminders of just how dangerous. A newly inducted Grey Knight is assigned to one of the chapter's 8 line brotherhoods, each one roughly equivalent to a company in a standard Codex Astartes compliant chapter. Each brotherhood is overseen by a Grand Master, a warrior of extraordinary power and experience, who serves as both military commander and spiritual guide for the 100-odd battle brothers under his authority. The brotherhoods of the Grey Knights are not interchangeable units. Each one has its own distinct character, its own area of specialization, its own traditions and accumulated history. The first brotherhood, known as the Swordbearers, Wasang, maintains and administers the chapter's armory and specializes in armored and aerial warfare. Within their ranks are the finest pilots of the chapter, as well as the chapter's tech marines, warriors who maintain the sacred war machines that carry the Grey Knights to battle. The Battle Brothers of the First are drilled to fight in perfect concert with these war machines, combining psychic might with the thunderous power of blessed engines of destruction. The Second Brotherhood, the Blades of Victory, are known for their aggressive tactics and their willingness to take the fight directly to the enemy's heart. They are the tip of the spear, the first through the breach, the ones who close the distance and bring the full weight of their nemesis weapons to bear before the enemy has time to react. The third, the Wardmakers, are, according to legend, the Brotherhood of Janus himself, the first Supreme Grand Master, and have produced many of the chapter's greatest heroes, including the current Supreme Grand Master Kaldor Drago and the legendary Arvan Stern. The Grand Master of the Third is traditionally the Warden of the Librarius, holding authority over the Librarium Daemonica and the chapter's librarians, a responsibility of immense weight and trust. The Fourth Brotherhood, the Prescient Brethren, are home to the chapter's most potent psychers and serve as the breeding ground for the Prognosticars, those rare individuals who possess the ability to foresee demonic threats before they fully manifest. The Prognosticars are among the most valuable assets in the entire Grey Knight's arsenal, but for the ability to predict where a demon will appear before it actually does so is worth more than any number of additional battle brothers. The Grand Master of the Fourth is the Keeper of the Augurium, responsible for interpreting the cryptic visions of the Prognosticars and translating them into actionable intelligence. The Fifth Brotherhood, the Preservers, are responsible for training the chapter's apothecaries and overseeing the management and preservation of the precious gene seed upon which the chapter's continued existence depends. This is arguably the most important non-combat role in the entire chapter, for without new gene seed, there can be no new Grey Knights, and without new Grey Knights, the chapter will eventually cease to exist. The Preservers treat their duty with almost sacred reverence, guarding the biological heritage of the Emperor with the same ferocity that their brothers bring to the battlefield. The Sixth Brotherhood, the Rapiers, are known as stringent taskmasters and strategic thinkers. Rather than relying on massed force, the Sixth favors surgical strikes of small, elite squads, deploying their warriors with precision and timing that would make a master clockmaker envious. The Grand Master of the Sixth, bearing the title of High Seneschal of the Citadel of Titan, is tasked with crafting the most effective strike forces possible, matching the right warriors with the right mission in ways that maximize their effectiveness and minimize their losses. When mass manpower is necessary and the Rapier's small squads are insufficient, the Sixth will deploy mindless servitors to bog down the enemy, allowing their Grey Knights to focus on the highest priority targets. The Seventh Brotherhood, the Exactors, have a long history of operating alongside the Ordo Malleus and often fight beside other Imperial forces requisitioned by Inquisitors. This is a delicate arrangement, for the Grey Knight's very existence is a secret, and fighting alongside non-inquisitorial forces risks that secret being exposed. The exactors have developed particular expertise in managing these situations, ensuring that the secrecy of the chapter is maintained, even while cooperating with allies who may not understand the full nature of the threat they are facing. In return for their cooperation, the Seventh relies on the Inquisition to supply them with intelligence and auxiliary forces, a symbiotic relationship that has endured for millennia. And the Eighth Brotherhood, us the Silverblades, are charged with recruiting and training new Grey Knights. The Master of the Eighth acts as the Master of Recruits for the entire chapter, overseeing the Gatherers and the Chamber of Trials, and ensuring that the flow of new aspirants never completely dries up. Many warriors who complete their training choose to remain in the Eighth rather than transferring to another brotherhood, drawn by the Eighth's reputation for fluid, adaptable combat tactics that change swiftly during battle, putting any available weapon to use, and preferring no single strategy over another. A newly inducted battle brother begins at the lowest rung of the Grey Knight's hierarchy, serving in a squad under the leadership of a Justicar. The Justicar is the Grey Knight's equivalent of a sergeant, the first rank above a standard battle brother, and serves as squad leader. Unlike the lower ranks, a Justicar is permitted to wear his own personal heraldry, a mark of distinction that may seem small but is deeply significant in a chapter that otherwise maintains strict uniformity. It is the first step on a path that can eventually lead to the rank of Grand Master. But the distance between the two is vast, and the journey is measured not in years, but in centuries of unbroken service. From Justicar, a Grey Knight may advance to the rank of Brother Captain, taking command of an entire brotherhood. Above the Brother Captains stand the Grand Masters, the 8 supreme commanders of the chapter's brotherhoods, and at the very pinnacle sits the Supreme Grand Master, the overall commander of the entire chapter, chosen from among the Grand Masters by his peers. But the rank structure also encompasses 2 specialized orders that exist outside the standard brotherhood hierarchy. The Order of Paladins, drawn from the greatest warriors across all brotherhoods who have completed a series of impossibly dangerous heroic quests, serve as bodyguards to the Grand Masters and the first warriors deployed against the most extreme threats. Their squad leaders, called Paragons, are among the most respected warriors in the chapter. After the completion of his quests, the newly risen paladin takes part in a victorious feast before leaving his brotherhood to reside within the hallowed halls of the paladins, bound now not just to the chapter, but to one of the Grand Masters personally, and the Brotherhood of Purifiers, the spiritual elite of the Grey Knights. Selected not for martial skill, but for the purity of their souls, the Purifiers can channel their inner light into literal psychic flame that burns demons at the spiritual level. At any given moment, there are rarely more than 40 or 50 Purifiers in existence. So high are the standards for admission. Led by the Castellan champion, who also bears the terrible burden of carrying the demon-possessed Blade of Antwer, the Purifiers represent the absolute pinnacle of what a human soul can become when forged by the Emperor's legacy and tempered by an eternity of war against the darkness. Now let us turn our attention to the battles themselves. Because it is on the battlefield that everything the Grey Knights are, everything they have been made to be, is put to the ultimate test. And the history of the chapter is rich with campaigns that demonstrate both the extraordinary capabilities of these warriors and the terrible cost of the war they fight. Perhaps the most famous battle in Grey Knight history is the First War for Armageddon. In 444 of the 41st Millennium, the demon Primarch Angron, fallen lord of the World Eaters' traitor legion and favored champion of the blood god Khorne, launched a massive invasion of the imperial hive world of Armageddon. Angron had spent millennia in the Eye of Terror, gathering his forces and reunifying the scattered remnants of his shattered legion. When he struck with overwhelming force, his armies of World Eaters, demons, and cultists sweeping across Armageddon's surface in a tide of blood and fury. The Imperium responded with everything available. Force regiments of the Imperial Guard, including the Armageddon Steel Legion, deployed to hold the line. Companies of space wolves, under the command of the great wolf Logan Grimner, fought with savage determination against the forces of chaos. Massive battles erupted along the entire front. In the east, along the Charon River, the Imperial forces held. But in the west, along the Styx River, Angron led the charge himself. The Daemon Primarch smashed through the Imperial lines and directed his forces toward Hive Infernus and Hive Hellsreach. No conventional force could stop him. Angron was a being of immense physical power, a creature of pure rage given form by the will of the blood god himself. His bloodthirster bodyguard, the most powerful greater demons of Khorne, carved through Imperial defenses with contemptuous ease. And it was then that the Grey Knights entered the battle. A full brotherhood, 109 warriors under the command of Brother Captain Taramar Aurelian, teleported directly into the midst of the Chaos Horde, materializing without warning in the space between Angron and his bodyguard. The surprise was absolute. One moment, the Demon Primarch was advancing unopposed toward the heartland of Armageddon. The next, he was surrounded by silver-armored warriors whose nemesis weapons blazed with psychic fire. What followed was one of the most desperate and costly engagements in the Grey Knights' entire 10,000-year history. The Grey Knights fought with everything they had, their stormbolters hammering psi-bolts into demonic flesh, their nemesis weapons carving through bloodthirsters, whose very presence dimmed the light and set the air on fire. The psychic output of an entire brotherhood of Grey Knights clashed with the warp-spawned fury of Horn's chosen servants, and the resulting discharge of energy was felt by psychers across the entire sector. One by one, the bloodthirsters fell, but so did the Grey Knights. Each demon's death throes took Grey Knights with it, their dying explosions of warp energy tearing through Ceramite and Silver Ward alike. The ground beneath the battle was soaked in blood, both mortal and demonic, the very earth beginning to corrupt and warp under the combined psychic strain. Brother after brother was cut down by Angron's terrible blows. The Demon Primarch's rage, an almost physical force that battered at the Grey Knight's psychic defenses, even as his weapons battered their bodies. A young battle brother named Hyperion, a gifted Pyrokyne barely out of his training, found himself the last member of Squad Castian still standing. His brothers were dead or dying around him, and Angron loomed above. The Demon Primarch's corrupted blade raised for another killing stroke. In a tremendous display of faith, power, and sheer desperate will, Hyperion channeled his psychic abilities into a single focused strike, not at Angron himself, but at the demon's weapon, the hideous cornate relic known as the Black Blade. The blade shattered. The psychic backlash knocked Hyperion unconscious, but the damage was done. Without his weapon, Angron was vulnerable. Brother Captain Aurelian seized the moment. In a final act of supreme sacrifice, he engaged the Demon Primarch directly, in his nemesis weapon blazing with the combined psychic energy of every surviving Grey Knight who could still channel their power. The blow that banished Angron back to the warp cost Aurelian his life. His body burned out by the sheer volume of psychic energy he was forced to channel through it. But the deed was done. The Demon Primarch dissolved, his physical form torn apart by the banishment ritual. And without their lord, the remaining demons lost their anchor to reality and began to fade. Of the 109 Grey Knights who had teleported into that battle, 96 were dead and 9 were permanently disabled. Only a handful walked away. Among the survivors were warriors who would go on to become legends within the chapter. Arvan Stern, Cadan Varn, Dark Tegvar, the young Vorth Mordrak, who would one day become a Grand Master, and Garen Crow, who was so profoundly affected by what he had experienced that he set aside his duty to his brotherhood and entered the ranks of the Purifiers, where he continues to serve to this day. But the aftermath of the First War for Armageddon proved almost as controversial as the battle itself. The general populace of Armageddon had been exposed to the existence of chaos, had witnessed demons walking among them, had seen things that the Inquisition's doctrine of secrecy could not allow to stand. By order of the Ordo Malleus, a massive purge was enacted. The soldiers who had fought bravely for their homeworld were rounded up, sterilized, and placed in work camps to labor until they died out. Entire worlds that had come into contact with survivors were cleansed. Billions of loyal Imperial citizens were killed to maintain the secrecy that the Grey Knights and the Inquisition deemed essential to the Imperium's survival. Logan Grimnar, the Great Wolf of the Space Wolves, was enraged beyond measure. He had fought alongside these people. He had witnessed their courage, their sacrifice, their absolute devotion to the Emperor in the face of horrors that would have broken lesser souls. And now, the Inquisition was repaying that devotion with execution. Grimnar attempted to intervene, trying to escort ships carrying survivors away from the Inquisition's containment fleet. The resulting conflict, which the Grey Knights would come to call the Months of Shame, pitted the Space Wolves against the combined forces of the Inquisition and the Grey Knights. Grand Master Joros, who oversaw the Grey Knights' involvement in the purge operations, was killed by Logan Grimnar in personal combat. It was one of the darkest chapters in the Grey Knights' history, a moment when the duty to secrecy brought them into direct conflict with warriors who were, in every meaningful sense, their brothers in service to the Emperor. Even within the Grey Knights themselves, the purge was controversial. Many battle brothers were frustrated at being used outside their mission parameters, at being turned into enforcers of a policy that many privately questioned. It was these frustrated Grey Knights who gave the campaign its unofficial name, a name that spoke of shame rather than glory, of duty that tasted like ashes rather than triumph. The Space Wolves have never forgiven the Grey Knights for their role in the aftermath of Armageddon. The relationship between the two chapters remains one of the most strained in the entire Imperium, a running wound that has never fully healed. It is one of the great ironies of the Grey Knights' existence that their most significant known enemies within the ranks of the loyal Imperium are the Space Wolves, warriors who share their devotion to the Emperor, but cannot accept the price that the Grey Knights pay, and demand others pay, in his name. Centuries later, the Grey Knights produced what may be their most famous individual hero, a warrior whose name has become synonymous with the chapter itself. Supreme Grand Master Kaldor Draigo. Draigo's story begins with a straightforward act of heroism. As a simple battle brother of the Third Brotherhood, the Wardmakers, while he participated in the defense of the world of Akralem against the demon prince Makar, the Reborn. In the heat of battle, Draigo found himself face to face with the demon, and through a combination of extraordinary skill and iron will, struck the killing blow that banished Makar back to the warp. The dying demon, in a final act of malice, laid a terrible curse upon the young Grey Knight, promising that if Draigo ever set foot on Akralem again, he would walk with damnation for 10,000 years. Draigo did not think much of the curse at the time. He had more pressing concerns. Over the following 2 centuries, he rose through the ranks with remarkable speed, his talent and determination earning him promotion after promotion. He became a Justicar, then a brother captain, and then, met in the aftermath of one of the most devastating battles in recent Grey Knight history, the Supreme Grand Master of the entire chapter. That battle was the Battle of Cornavin in the year 901 of the 41st Millennium, where the demon Primarch Mortarion, Lord of the Death Guard and favoured son of Nurgle, led an assault against the forces of the Grey Knights. During the fighting, Mortarion killed the then Supreme Grand Master Geronitan, cutting down the chapter's leader with contemptuous ease. In the chaos and desperation that followed, the surviving Grand Masters made a hasty decision. They selected Kaldor Draigo, despite his relative youth and inexperience, to assume the mantle of Supreme Grand Master. It proved to be an inspired choice. Wielding the Titan Sword, the legendary blade that had been carried by every Supreme Grand Master since Janus himself, Draigo confronted the weakened Mortarion. The ensuing duel was a thing of terrible beauty. The finest swordsman in the Grey Knights against a being who had been a demigod even before the powers of Nurgle had elevated him to immortality. Drygo found his opening and took it. He spoke the true name that the Emperor had originally intended for Mortarion, the name that the fallen Primarch had rejected when he turned to Chaos, and the power of that name, spoken with the full psychic force of the Supreme Grand Master behind it, shattered Mortarion's physical form. Before the demon dissolved entirely, Drygo carved his fallen predecessor's name, Geronitan, into the demon's exposed heart. An insult that Mortarion has carried with him into the warp and which he has sworn to repay. But Drygo's greatest challenge came 200 years after his first encounter with Makar. True to the demon's curse, Akralim was invaded once more, and Drygo, honor-bound to face the threat, traveled there alone, forbidding his brothers to follow. The battle that ensued saw Drygo defeat Makar for the second time, but the dying demon seized the Grey Knight and hurled him through a collapsing warp rift and into the realm of chaos itself. Kaldor Drygo survived. He walks the realm of chaos to this day, fighting an endless war within the very domains of the Chaos Gods. He has burned through Nurgle's garden, leaving a trail of purified earth in his wake. He has toppled the crystal fortresses of Tzeentch, shattering the schemes of the architect of fate. He has carved a path of destruction through the warp that no mortal should be able to sustain, sustained by nothing but his own psychic might, his faith in the Emperor, and the power of the Titan Zord in his hand. And occasionally, in moments of great need, Drygo manages to claw his way back to the material universe. He appears briefly on the battlefield, fighting alongside his brothers against the most dire of threats, before the warp reclaims him and drags him back into its depths. During the assault on Sortiarius, the Thousand Suns' homeworld in the warp, Drygo reappeared to help guide Imperial forces. During the battles of the Great Rift, he has surfaced multiple times, always at the moment when his presence was most needed and always for too brief a time. Thus, the Grey Knights have acknowledged that if Drygo cannot escape his curse soon, a new Supreme Grand Master will need to be named. But until that day comes, the chapter holds him in a place of honor and reverence that transcends even the respect normally afforded to the holder of his office. He is proof that the Grey Knight's ideals are not merely abstractions, that a single warrior, armed with faith and will and the Emperor's own gift, can stand alone against the full fury of the Chaos Gods and refuse to break. In the current era, the Grey Knights face challenges that dwarf even the terrors of their long history. The Great Rift, that massive tear in reality that has split the galaxy in two, has unleashed a wave of demonic incursions on a scale that the Imperium has never seen. The Grey Knights have been at the forefront of the fighting, us deploying wherever the Ordo Malleus identifies the most critical threats, but they are stretched thinner than they have ever been. Multiple Grand Masters have been lost in the benighted darkness of the Imperium Nihilus, the half of the galaxy cut off from the light of the Astronomicon. The Chapter Council is depleted. Their Supreme Grand Master is trapped in the warp, and the enemies they face are more numerous and more powerful than at any time since the Horus Heresy itself. The loss of many black ships has crippled their recruitment pipeline, forcing the Grey Knights to resort to desperate measures to maintain their numbers. They have attacked other Imperial institutions to seize potential recruits. They have enacted exterminatus on compromised worlds more liberally than they would have in calmer times. Guess they have pushed the limits of what is acceptable even by their own harsh standards, driven by the knowledge that if they fail, if their numbers drop below the critical threshold needed to maintain a galactic defense against demonic incursion, the consequences would be catastrophic beyond imagining. During the formation of the Great Rift itself, the Grey Knights fought in the Terran Crusade and the Battle of Lion's Gate on Terra, standing among the defenders of the throne world itself, against a tide of demonic forces that threatened to overwhelm the very heart of the Imperium. In the aftermath, they worked desperately to contain the outbreaks in the Dark Imperium and beyond, forcibly annihilating billions of Imperial citizens whose exposure to the warp made them potential vectors for further corruption. More recently, the Grey Knights have faced the returned demon Primarch Angron once more. In the Season of Blood, forces under Grandmaster Rothweir Morven's return to Armageddon to prevent its fall to a massive Khornate horde led by the Red Angel. In the climactic battle, the Grey Knights succeeded in banishing Angron once again and sealing the warp portal known as the Red Angel's Gate, but at the cost of Morven's own life. The price of the Grey Knights' eternal vigil continues to be paid in the blood of their finest warriors. And yet, through it all, not a single Grey Knight has ever fallen to chaos. In 10,000 years of constant warfare against the most corrupting force in the universe, not one warrior of Chapter 666 has succumbed to the temptations of the Dark Gods. This is the Grey Knights' proudest claim and their most powerful proof of concept. The system works. The recruitment, the trials, the gene seed, the training, the wards and weapons and prayers, all of it combines to create a warrior who is, for all practical purposes, immune to the very corruption that brought the Imperium to the brink of destruction during the Horus heresy. This is what the Emperor intended. This is what he sacrificed Malkador and the resources of an entire moon to create. An incorruptible force, a weapon that could not be turned against its wielder, a shield that would never break, no matter how hard the enemy pressed against it. The path to becoming a Grey Knight is the hardest road any human being can walk. It begins with the loss of everything you are, your name, your memories, your identity. It continues through years of agony and transformation, through trials that kill the overwhelming majority of those who attempt them, through surgical procedures that remake your body at the cellular level, through psychic training that pushes your mind to the breaking point and beyond. And it ends, if you are among the very few who survive, with the acceptance of a burden that will define every moment of the rest of your existence. You will carry a weapon that can cut through the substance of nightmares. You will wear armor inscribed with wards that burn demons at a touch. You will speak prayers that shatter the will of entities older than the stars. And you will fight, again and again and again, against enemies whose very nature means they can never be permanently defeated, yet only temporarily driven back into the darkness from which they emerged. You will not be remembered by the masses. Your name will be known only to your brothers and to the Inquisition. Your victories will be celebrated in halls that no outsider will ever see. Your sacrifices will be honored in silence by warriors who understand the price you paid because they have paid it themselves. And when you fall, as all warriors eventually must, your body will be carried back to the frozen fields of Titan and laid to rest among the bones of thousands who came before you. Your weapons and armor passed to the next warrior in an endless chain of guardianship that stretches from the founding of the chapter to the end of time itself. This is what it means to become a Grey Knight. Not glory, not fame, not the gratitude of grateful millions. Just the knowledge that you stand between humanity and the worst things in the universe, and the iron certainty that as long as you draw breath, you will not allow those things to pass. Think about what that means for a moment. Think about the kind of soul it takes to endure this path. A boy is taken from his home, from everything he has ever known. He is subjected to horrors that would break most adults, let alone children. He has his identity stripped away, his memories erased, his very sense of self rebuilt from the ground up. He is surgically transformed into something that is no longer human. He is psychically awakened, trained to wield powers that carry the risk of self-destruction with every use. He is given weapons of extraordinary power and told to fight enemies that cannot truly be killed, only temporarily banished. And he does it. Not because he was programmed to, not because he was brainwashed into compliance, but because somewhere deep in the core of his being, in that place that the 666 rituals of detestation were designed to find and test, there burns a light that refuses to go out, a light that the Emperor himself planted in the human genome, a spark of divinity that only the purest and strongest souls can carry without being consumed by it. That light is what makes a Grey Knight. Not the armor, not the weapons, not the gene seed or the psychic training or the encyclopedic knowledge of demon lore. Those are tools, important tools, essential tools, but tools nonetheless. What makes a Grey Knight is the soul that wields those tools. The incorruptible core of will and faith and purpose that no demon can touch, no temptation can reach, and no darkness can extinguish. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But in the silver ranks of the Grey Knights, there is something more. There is purpose. There is purity. There is the unbreakable will of warriors who carry the Emperor's own legacy in their blood and his fire in their souls. They are the thin silver line between humanity and the abyss, the last and best defense against the horrors that lurk beyond the veil of reality. And for as long as they endure, for as long as a single Grey Knight stands with Nemesis' weapon in hand and the Emperor's fire in his heart, the abyss will not prevail. The darkness will be held at bay. The nightmares will be fought back. And the light, however faint, however battered, however besieged from all sides, will continue to burn. That is the promise of the Grey Knights. And that is the covenant forged 10,000 years ago, in the shadow of Saturn's rings, sealed in gene seed and silver and the blood of martyrs. It is a covenant that has never been broken. And if the Grey Knights have anything to say about it, it never will be. There is a moment that exists in the space between worlds, a heartbeat of silence between the thunder of teleportation and the scream of battle, when a Grey Knight stands poised on the threshold of the impossible. In that moment, the warrior is surrounded by the swirling energies of the warp itself, his body translated into pure information and hurled across the void at speeds that would make a navigator weep with envy. His aegis armor flares with protective light, and the wards inscribed upon its surface burning white-hot as they repel the predatory entities that swarm through the Imperium, like sharks drawn to blood in the water. The warrior cannot move, cannot fight, cannot even think in any meaningful sense during this fraction of a second that feels like an eternity. He can only endure and trust in the protections that generations of tech priests and psychic artificers have woven into the very fabric of his being. And then the moment passes. Reality snaps back into focus with a violence that would shatter an unenhanced human mind. The Grey Knight materializes on the battlefield in a flash of silver light and displaced air, his Stormbolter already tracking targets, his Nemesis weapon already blazing with psychic fire, his mind already linked to his brothers through the egregore, and sharing targeting data and tactical assessments at the speed of thought. There is no disorientation, no moment of adjustment. The Grey Knights have been doing this for 10,000 years, and they have perfected the art of violence delivered from nowhere with absolute precision. This is how the Grey Knights prefer to fight. Not with the grinding attrition of conventional warfare, not with the slow advance of armored columns or the patient siege of fortified positions. When possible, they strike from nowhere, materializing directly in the enemy's midst through teleportation or dropping from orbit in armored strikecraft that scream through the atmosphere like silver comets. The element of surprise is a weapon they wield with the same deadly precision as their nemesis blades. And the psychological impact of a full squad of Grey Knights appearing from thin air in the middle of a demonic ritual is often enough to shatter the concentration of even the most powerful sorcerers. But teleportation is merely the delivery system. The real art of the Grey Knights' warfare lies in what happens after they arrive. To understand how a Grey Knight fights, you have to understand the nature of the enemies he faces. And that means we need to talk in more detail about demons, because demons are not like any other enemy in the galaxy. They do not follow the rules that govern mortal warfare. They do not care about supply lines or strategic objectives or the morale of their troops. They are, in the most literal sense possible, creatures of pure will and emotion, given physical form. And the rules that govern their behavior are as alien and incomprehensible as the dimension from which they emerge. A demon's physical body, if it can be called that, is not made of matter. It is made of warp stuff, solidified psychic energy shaped into a form that reflects the demon's nature and the will of whichever chaos god it serves. A bloodletter of Khorne, for example, appears as a crimson-skinned humanoid wreathed in flame, its body a perfect expression of focused rage and bloodlust. A plague-bearer of Nurgle shambles forward on rotting legs, its body a bloated, diseased mass that exudes clouds of toxic vapor. A demonette of Slaanesh moves with inhuman grace, its androgynous form radiating a beauty so intense and so fundamentally wrong that mortal eyes cannot look upon it without feeling both desire and revulsion in equal measure. And a horror of Tzeentch is a constantly shifting mass of color and form, its body changing shape from one moment to the next, as if unable to decide what it wants to be. These bodies are not truly alive in any biological sense. They do not breathe. They do not eat, in the conventional meaning of the word, though many demons consume the souls and psychic energy of their victims. They do not reproduce through biological means. They are projections, avatars, temporary vessels through which the demon's true essence, which exists entirely within the warp, can interact with the material world. And because these bodies are not truly material, they cannot be destroyed by material means alone. You can shoot a demon with a bolter. The mass-reactive shell will impact its warp-stuffed flesh, will blow chunks of its body away in sprays of ichor and psychic residue. The demon will stagger. It may even fall. But unless the weapon carries some form of psychic or faith-based charge, the damage will be temporary. The demon will reform. The warp stuff will flow back together, the wounds closing as if they had never existed. The demon will rise again and continue fighting as if nothing had happened. This is why conventional weapons are so ineffective against demonic entities. This is why the Imperial Guard, for all its billions of soldiers and its mountains of ammunition, is so poorly equipped to deal with demonic incursions. You cannot kill a demon with laser fire. You can inconvenience it, you can slow it down, you can buy yourself a few precious seconds of breathing room, but you cannot end it, not with material weapons alone. What you need is something that can affect the demon's true essence, the part of it that exists in the warp. You need a weapon that carries psychic force, that channels the energy of the Imperium itself against the creature that was born from it. You need a weapon that can reach through the demon's physical shell and strike at the soul, for lack of a better word, that animates it. This is what the Grey Knights bring to the fight. Every weapon they carry, from their storm bolters loaded with psybolts, to their nemesis force weapons, to the psychic powers they project directly from their minds, is designed to strike at a demon on both the physical and the spiritual level simultaneously. When a Grey Knight swings his nemesis sword through a demon's body, the blade does not merely cut through warp-stuffed flesh. It channels a pulse of psychic energy that disrupts the demon's connection to the Imperium, weakening the bond between its true essence and its physical manifestation. Multiple such strikes can weaken that bond to the point where the demon can no longer sustain its presence in the material world, and it is yanked back into the warp like a fish being hauled out of the sea by an invisible line. But that is only banishment, not destruction. True destruction, the permanent elimination of a demonic entity, is extraordinarily difficult and requires knowledge and power that only the most senior Grey Knights possess. The true name of a demon, spoken with psychic force and combined with specific rituals of banishment, can inflict lasting damage on the demon's essence within the warp. In theory, a sufficiently powerful psyker, armed with a demon's complete true name, could unmake the creature entirely, scattering its essence across the Imperium until it could never reform. In practice, this has been achieved only a handful of times in the Grey Knight's entire history. And even then, there is no absolute certainty that the demon is truly gone for good. This is the fundamental frustration of the Grey Knights' war. They fight an enemy that cannot truly be killed. Every demon they banish will eventually return. Every victory they win is temporary. The best they can hope for is to keep the darkness at bay, to banish demons back to the warp fast enough that the material universe is not overwhelmed by the sheer weight of demonic incursion. It is a war of attrition fought against an enemy with infinite reserves. And the only thing that keeps the Grey Knights from being overwhelmed is their extraordinary quality and the equally extraordinary dedication of the Ordo Malleus to ensuring that they have the intelligence and resources they need to respond to threats before those threats become unmanageable. This is also why the prognosticars are so valuable. The prognosticars are Grey Knights of the Fourth Brotherhood who possess the rare gift of precognition, the ability to see echoes of future events within the shifting currents of the warp. They do not see the future with clarity or precision. The warp does not work that way. Instead, they perceive patterns and probabilities, sensing the convergence of psychic forces that typically precede a major demonic incursion. By interpreting these patterns, the prognosticars can predict where and when a demonic threat is likely to manifest, allowing the Grey Knights to be in position before the incursion begins, rather than scrambling to respond after the fact. The value of this capability cannot be overstated. A demonic incursion that is met immediately, before the demons have had time to establish a foothold and begin drawing additional reinforcements from the warp, can often be contained and eliminated with minimal casualties. An incursion that is allowed to develop unchecked for even a few hours can spiral into a full-blown demonic invasion that may require the combined resources of multiple Grey Knight Brotherhoods, entire regiments of Imperial Guard, and the intervention of other Space Marine chapters to contain. The prognosticar's ability to predict these events before they happen is, in many cases, the difference between a manageable tactical engagement and a sector-wide catastrophe. The prognosticars consult the Emperor's Tarot, a divinatory system that uses psychically charged cards to interpret the currents of the warp, and they meditate in the Augurium, a chamber within the Citadel of Titan that is specifically designed to enhance precognitive abilities. The walls of the Augurium are inscribed with wards that filter the psychic noise of the warp, allowing the prognosticars to perceive the faintest whispers of future events without being overwhelmed by the constant background roar of demonic activity. But the visions they receive are often fragmentary and cryptic, requiring extensive interpretation and cross-referencing with intelligence reports from the Ordo Malleus before they can be translated into actionable deployment orders. But even with all of these preparations, the Grey Knights are often operating at the very limits of their capabilities. A chapter of approximately 1,000 warriors, no matter how individually powerful those warriors may be, cannot hope to personally respond to every demonic threat in a galaxy that spans hundreds of thousands of light years. The Grey Knights must be selective, deploying only to the most critical incursions and trusting that lesser threats will be handled by the Ordo Malleus's Inquisitors and whatever conventional forces they can bring to bear. And this selectivity is one of the most difficult aspects of the Grey Knight's command structure. Every Grand Master who must choose which incursion to respond to knows that he is implicitly deciding which threats will go unanswered, which worlds will be left to face the darkness alone, which populations will suffer and die because the Grey Knight's resources were needed elsewhere. It is a burden that weighs heavily on even the most experienced commanders, and it is one of the reasons why the Grey Knight's chapter culture places such enormous emphasis on psychological resilience and emotional discipline. A warrior who cannot make the hard choices, who cannot accept the necessity of sacrifice, who cannot look at a plea for help and say, "Not this time, not this one, we are needed elsewhere," without being paralyzed by guilt. He is a warrior who cannot function effectively as a Grey Knight. The chapter's relationship with the Inquisition, and specifically with the Ordo Malleus, is central to how the Grey Knights operate. The Ordo Malleus is the demon-hunting branch of the Inquisition, the organization responsible for identifying and cataloging demonic threats across the Imperium. Inquisitors of the Ordo Malleus operate throughout Imperial space, maintaining networks of informants and agents, monitoring psychic activity, investigating reports of cult activity and supernatural phenomena, and building the intelligence picture that allows the Grey Knights to deploy effectively. When an Inquisitor of the Ordo Malleus identifies a demonic threat that exceeds the capacity of local forces to contain, they can request the deployment of Grey Knights. This request goes through the Ordo Malleus's command structure and is evaluated by the Grey Knight's own chapter leadership, who assess the threat level, determine the appropriate response force, and issue deployment orders. In cases of extreme urgency, a Grey Knight strike force may be dispatched within hours of the initial report, teleporting directly from Titan or from one of the chapter's strike cruisers positioned throughout the galaxy. The relationship between the Grey Knights and the Inquisition is not always harmonious. Inquisitors, even those of the Ordo Malleus, are mortal men and women with their own agendas, their own interpretations of imperial doctrine, and their own ideas about how the war against chaos should be fought. Some Inquisitors view the Grey Knights as tools to be deployed at their discretion, or while the Grey Knights themselves insist on maintaining operational independence and the right to refuse deployments that they deem tactically unsound or strategically unnecessary. This tension has occasionally erupted into open conflict, though such incidents are rare and are usually resolved through the intervention of senior Inquisitor Lords and Grey Knight Grand Masters, who understand the importance of maintaining the alliance. The Ordo Malleus also provides the Grey Knights with access to resources and capabilities that the chapter could not maintain on its own. The Inquisition's vast intelligence network, its diplomatic connections, its authority to requisition forces and resources from anywhere in the Imperium, all of these are available to the Grey Knights through their alliance with the Ordo Malleus. In return, but the Grey Knights provide the Inquisition with the military capability it needs to deal with the most extreme demonic threats, a capability that no other force in the Imperium can match. This symbiotic relationship has endured for 10,000 years, surviving internal crises, external threats, and the occasional disagreement over policy and procedure. It is one of the most important and most enduring alliances in the Imperium, and it is essential to the continued survival of the human species. Without the Inquisition's intelligence capabilities, the Grey Knights would be fighting blind, unable to identify and respond to threats before they became unmanageable. Without the Grey Knights' military capability, the Inquisition would be powerless to deal with the most extreme demonic incursions, and reduced to watching helplessly as worlds burned and billions died. There is another aspect of the Grey Knight's existence that deserves attention, one that is often overlooked in discussions that focus on their combat capabilities and their famous battles. And that is the question of what a Grey Knight's life is like between battles. Because Grey Knights do not fight every moment of every day, there are periods of relative calm between deployments, periods when the warriors of Titan are not engaged in active combat, and what happens during those periods says as much about the character of the chapter as any battlefield victory. A Grey Knight between deployments is not idle. The concept of leisure, of relaxation in the way that ordinary humans understand it, is essentially alien to these warriors. Their time is divided between training and meditation, maintenance of their equipment, study of demon lore, and participation in the rituals and ceremonies that define the chapter's spiritual life. Training is constant and relentless. Grey Knights spar with each other in the training chambers of the Citadel, honing their skills with nemesis weapons and practicing the coordinated psychic techniques that form the basis of their combat doctrine. These sparring sessions are conducted at full intensity, with the only concession to safety being the use of practice weapons that are psych-dampened to prevent accidental fatalities. Injuries are common and expected. A Grey Knight who has not been injured in training is a Grey Knight who is not training hard enough. Meditation is equally important. Grey Knights spend significant portions of their non-combat time in deep meditative states, reinforcing their psychic defenses and maintaining the constant state of mental vigilance that is essential to their survival. These meditation sessions often take place in the Cloister of Sorrows or in private chambers within the Citadel, and they can last for hours or even days. During these periods, the Grey Knight's mind is engaged in a continuous process of self-examination and self-fortification, shoring up the walls of his psychic fortress against the constant background pressure of the warp. Maintenance of equipment is treated as a sacred duty rather than a mundane chore. A Grey Knight's weapons and armor are consecrated artifacts, and their care is a form of worship. the warrior cleanses and polishes each piece of his equipment by hand, reapplying the prayers and blessings that maintain the ward's effectiveness, as checking every seal and every sigil for signs of degradation or corruption. This process can take hours, but it is never rushed. A ward that is improperly maintained could fail at a critical moment, and a ward failure in the presence of a demon could mean death, not just for the warrior whose equipment failed, but for everyone around him. Study of demon lore is an ongoing requirement for all Grey Knights. The Librarium Demonica is constantly being updated as new information is gathered from the field, and Grey Knights are expected to stay current with the latest intelligence on demonic activity and tactics. This study is not merely academic. The knowledge a Grey Knight carries in his mind is a weapon, and like any weapon, it must be kept sharp. A Grey Knight who cannot identify a specific type of demon on sight, who does not know its vulnerabilities and its patterns of behavior, who cannot recall the words of the banishment ritual appropriate to that demon's patron deity, is a Grey Knight who is not prepared for battle. The rituals and ceremonies of the chapter are numerous and varied, ranging from daily prayers and litanies to elaborate multi-day observances that commemorate significant events in the chapter's history. These rituals serve multiple purposes. They reinforce the bonds of brotherhood that connect every Grey Knight to every other. They maintain the psychic defenses of the citadel itself, whose wards require regular renewal and reinforcement, and they provide a framework of spiritual discipline that helps the warriors of Titan maintain their mental equilibrium in the face of the horrors they routinely confront. The chapter also maintains its own chaplains, warriors who fulfill the same spiritual and morale functions as chaplains in other Space Marine chapters, but at a level of intensity and complexity that reflects the unique challenges of the Grey Knight's mission. Grey Knight chaplains are rare and extraordinarily capable individuals, psychers of great power, who have also mastered the theological and philosophical traditions that underpin the chapter's spiritual doctrine. They minister to the needs of warriors who face horrors that would break the sanity of most humans, providing counsel, conducting rituals, and maintaining the framework of faith and discipline that holds the chapter together. There is a loneliness to the Grey Knight's existence that is difficult to overstate. They cannot share the details of their battles with anyone outside their own ranks and the Inquisition. They cannot form meaningful relationships with ordinary humans, whose minds would be destroyed by the knowledge that the Grey Knights carry as a matter of course. They cannot even maintain normal relationships with other Space Marines, who may or may not know of the Grey Knights' existence, and who, if they do encounter them, will typically have their memories of the encounter erased. Grey Knights live in a world of absolute secrecy, surrounded by walls of classification and compartmentalization that separate them from the rest of humanity, as completely as the walls of the Citadel separate them from the frozen wasteland of Titan's surface. Their victories are uncelebrated. Their sacrifices are unacknowledged. That their very existence is denied to all but the most privileged and trusted members of the Imperial hierarchy. And yet, they continue. They continue to train, to fight, to sacrifice, to endure the unendurable, not because they seek recognition or reward, but because the alternative is unthinkable. If the Grey Knights were to fail, if they were to falter in their duty even for a moment, the consequences would be felt across the entire galaxy. The demonic incursions that they currently contain would spiral out of control. The warp gates that they seal would remain open. The demon princes and greater demons that they banish would roam free, unopposed by any force capable of truly challenging them. The Grey Knights are the dam that holds back the flood. They are the wall that keeps the darkness at bay. And they perform this function in total silence, in complete anonymity, without any expectation of gratitude or remembrance. There is something deeply moving about that, something that transcends the martial grandeur and the psychic firepower and the blessed silver armor. At its core, the Grey Knight's story is a story about sacrifice, about giving up everything, your name, your memories, your humanity, your chance for recognition, your hope for a normal life, in exchange for the chance to protect people who will never know you existed. It is a sacrifice that is made fresh every day by every Grey Knight who wakes up in his cell in the citadel of Titan, puts on his armor, takes up his weapon, and goes out to face the nightmares that the rest of humanity is mercifully unaware of. And it is a sacrifice that will continue to be made for as long as there are threats to face and warriors willing to face them. The Grey Knights were created to fight an eternal war, a war that will never end as long as the warp exists, and as long as sentient beings generate the psychic energy that fuels the Chaos Gods. They know this, they accept it, they embrace it, not with joy or enthusiasm, but with the grim, quiet determination of soldiers who understand that their duty is not bounded by the limits of a single lifetime or a single conflict, but extends across the full span of human history and beyond. The war goes on. It will always go on. But the Grey Knights will be there, standing between the light and the darkness, wielding the Emperor's fire against the enemies of all mankind. And for those who understand what that means, yet for those who can appreciate the depth of the sacrifice and the purity of the commitment, the Grey Knights are not merely warriors. They are the embodiment of everything that the Imperium claims to stand for, stripped of the corruption, the hypocrisy, and the institutional decay that mars so much of human civilization in the 41st millennium. They are the ideal made flesh, the promise kept, the fire that never goes out. In the novels of the Black Library, the Grey Knights have been brought to vivid life by some of the setting's finest authors. Aaron Dembski-Baldwin's novel, The Emperor's Gift, follows two aspirants recruited into the Grey Knights and is widely regarded as one of the best depictions of the chapter's culture, philosophy, and the brutal realities of their existence. Through the eyes of the Bladebreaker Hyperion, which readers experience the process of becoming a Grey Knight from the inside, feeling the confusion of memory erasure, the agony of gene seed implantation, the terror of facing one's first demon, and the complicated moral calculus of the months of shame in the aftermath of the First War for Armageddon. Ben Counter's Grey Knights Omnibus, while older and predating some of the more recent lore developments, provides an excellent introduction to the faction through the adventures of Justicar Alaric, a warrior who retains unusual qualities of imagination and creativity that are normally destroyed by the Grey Knight's training process. Alaric's sharp mind proves to be a decisive advantage in his battles against some of the most dangerous demonic entities in the galaxy, and his story illustrates an important principle, as that even within the rigid structure of the Grey Knights, there is room for individual excellence and unconventional thinking. More recently, David Geimer's Angron, the Red Angel, showcases the Grey Knights in action against one of their most formidable opponents, demonstrating that the chapter is not above using unconventional tactics, including the controversial practice of using bound demons against their own kind. This practice, which has been developed in recent millennia by some of the chapter's librarians, involves ritually bartering with demons in exchange for their true names, then binding them in flesh prisons of warded mortal shells. The bound demons can be unleashed against other demons in battle, turning the enemy's own weapons against them. It is a practice that not all Grey Knights are comfortable with, and it represents the outer edge of what the chapter considers acceptable in its never-ending war. These stories, and others like them, paint a picture of the Grey Knights that goes beyond the simple narrative of unstoppable super soldiers crushing their enemies beneath silver boots. They reveal a chapter of warriors who struggle, who doubt, who question the costs of their duty, even as they fulfill it without hesitation. They show men who have given up everything and who continue to give day after day, century after century, because the alternative is too terrible to contemplate. This is what makes the Grey Knights so compelling as a faction within the Warhammer 40,000 universe. They are not merely powerful, they are tragic. They are heroic, not because they cannot be hurt, but because they endure hurt willingly, while because they accept suffering as the price of duty and pay it without complaint. They are the purest expression of the setting's central theme, that in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war, and that those who fight that war must be willing to sacrifice everything, absolutely everything, in its prosecution. And yet, even in the midst of all that darkness, the Grey Knights offer something that is vanishingly rare in the Warhammer 40,000 setting. They offer hope, not the naive, uncomplicated hope of a fairy tale, but the hard, battle-tested hope of warriors who have seen the worst the universe has to offer and have chosen to keep fighting anyway. The hope that says yes, the darkness is real, and yes, it is vast and powerful and perhaps ultimately undefeatable, but we will fight it nonetheless. We will stand against it with everything we have, for as long as we can, because that is what we were made to do, and because the alternative is unacceptable. That is the Grey Knights' gift to the Imperium. Not just their swords and their psychic fire and their blessed silver armor, but the knowledge that somewhere out there, in the cold and the dark, there are warriors who will never stop fighting, who will never give in, who will never surrender to the darkness, no matter how overwhelming it becomes. That is enough. In a galaxy drowning in war, in a civilization rotting from within, in a universe where gods of cruelty and madness peer down at humanity like children examining insects, that is enough. The knowledge that someone is out there, fighting the fight that no one else can fight, holding the line that no one else can hold. Air is a flame that can warm even the coldest heart and light even the darkest night. The Grey Knights are that flame, and for as long as they burn, humanity has a chance. Let us go deeper still into what it means to walk in the boots of a Grey Knight. Because there are aspects of this existence that we have only touched upon, dimensions of the experience that deserve to be explored in greater detail if we are to truly understand the weight of what these warriors carry. Consider the moment of first contact. The very first time a fully trained, fully equipped, freshly inducted Grey Knight faces a demon in battle. Not in the controlled environment of the training chambers, where bound entities are used as sparring partners under the watchful eyes of chaplains and librarians. Not in the psychic simulations that form part of the training curriculum, but in the field, on a world that may be burning around him, against an enemy that wants nothing more than to devour his soul. No amount of training can fully prepare a warrior for this moment. The training can teach technique. It can build resilience. It can provide knowledge and create reflexes. But it cannot replicate the visceral, gut-wrenching horror of standing face to face with something that should not exist. A creature born not from the natural processes of evolution or biology, but from the raw, screaming emotional energy of billions of tortured souls, compressed and shaped by the will of a malevolent god into a form designed specifically to inspire terror and inflict suffering. The air around a demon changes, the temperature drops or rises unpredictably. Colors shift and bleed at the edges of your vision, as if reality itself is becoming uncertain, losing confidence in its own solidity. Sound distorts. Voices echo from sources that are not there. The ground beneath your feet feels subtly wrong, as if the earth has become less sure of itself, less committed to the fundamental principles of physics that normally keep it stable and reliable. And overlaying all of this, pressing against your psychic senses like a wave of filth against a window, is the demon's presence, its raw, unfiltered malice, radiating outward in concentric rings of spiritual poison that would corrode the soul of an unprotected human in moments. A Grey Knight feels all of this. His enhanced senses and his psychic awareness mean that he experiences the demon's presence more keenly, more intimately, than any normal human could. But where a normal human would be overwhelmed, paralyzed, driven to madness by the sheer wrongness of what they were experiencing, the Grey Knight stands firm. His aegis flares, the wards on his armor burning bright, pushing back against the demon's influence with a counter-pressure of psychic purity that causes the creature visible discomfort. His mind, encased in its cage of faith and will, registers the demon's presence as a tactical datum rather than an existential threat. His body, enhanced by the Emperor's own gene seed and armored in consecrated ceramite, is a fortress that the demon's corruption cannot breach. And then the Grey Knight attacks. And in that moment, the demon learns a lesson that its kind has been learning for 10,000 years. That's a lesson that never seems to stick no matter how many times it is taught. The lesson is this: there exist warriors in the galaxy for whom demons are not objects of terror, but targets of opportunity. There exist men who have been specifically, meticulously, comprehensively designed to hunt and destroy the most dangerous creatures in existence. And those men are coming for you. The first blow of a nemesis weapon against demonic flesh is a sensation that Grey Knights describe in terms that are almost mystical. The weapon sings. That is the word they use. It sings when it strikes a demon, the psychoconductive circuitry within the blade resonating with the psychic energy of the blow and producing a harmonic that is part sound, part sensation, part something else entirely that has no name in any human language. The demon screams, but the warp shudders, and the Grey Knight feels, through the medium of his weapon and his psychic connection to it, the demon's essence being torn, weakened, diminished by the force of his strike. It is a feeling that some Grey Knights describe as close to transcendent. For a warrior who has given up everything, who has sacrificed his name and his memories and his humanity for the privilege of fighting this war, the moment when his weapon bites into demonic flesh and he feels the enemy weaken beneath his blows is the closest thing to satisfaction that his existence allows. Not pleasure, not joy, something deeper and colder and more austere than either. The grim fulfillment of purpose, the knowledge that the machine is working as intended, that the weapon the Emperor forged 10,000 years ago is still sharp, still effective, us still doing exactly what it was designed to do. Let us also speak at greater length about the different types of demons that the Grey Knights most commonly face, because understanding the enemy is essential to understanding the warriors who fight them. The forces of Khorne, the blood god, are perhaps the most straightforward opponents that a Grey Knight can face. Khorne's demons are creatures of pure rage and violence, designed for close combat, and possessed of an almost mindless devotion to the act of killing. Bloodletters, the rank-and-file infantry of Khorne's legions, wield hellblades that can cut through ceramite armor with disturbing ease, and they fight with a ferocity that can overwhelm even experienced warriors through sheer relentless aggression. Bloodthirsters, the greater demons of Khorne, are among the most physically powerful individual entities in existence, towering creatures of muscle and fury that can tear a battle tank apart with their bare hands. Fighting Khornate demons is, in a sense, the closest thing to conventional warfare that the Grey Knights experience. The blood god despises sorcery and psychic power, which means that his demons rarely employ the kind of reality-warping trickery that makes demons of other gods so dangerous. They come at you straight and they come at you hard, and the battle is decided by who is stronger, faster, and more skilled in the art of melee combat. For the Grey Knights, who are trained from the moment of their induction to be some of the finest close combat warriors in the galaxy, this is almost a comfortable matchup. Almost. Most because a bloodthirster can kill even a Grey Knight with a single blow if the warrior is not careful, and the sheer numbers of lesser Khornate demons can overwhelm even a well-prepared strike force through attrition. The forces of Tzeentch, the Changer of Ways, present a very different challenge. Tzeentch's demons are creatures of sorcery and deception, masters of illusion and manipulation who fight as much with their minds as with their bodies. Lords of Change, the greater demons of Tzeentch, are among the most powerful psykers in existence, capable of feats of sorcery that can warp reality itself, turning the battlefield into a shifting, unstable nightmare where nothing is what it seems. Horrors, the lesser demons of Tzeentch, are constantly shifting masses of color and form that split into smaller versions of themselves when struck, meaning that a squad that thinks it is reducing the enemy's numbers may actually be increasing them. Fighting sentient demons requires a Grey Knight to be as much a psychic duelist as a physical combatant. The warrior must be able to identify and counter complex sorcerous attacks while simultaneously maintaining his own psychic defenses and pressing the fight at close range. The Lords of Change are particularly dangerous because they can manipulate probability itself, causing weapons to misfire, armor seals to fail, and tactical plans to unravel through a series of seemingly unrelated coincidences that are actually the carefully orchestrated machinations of a being whose intellect is vast beyond human comprehension. Or the forces of Nurgle, the Plague Father, are perhaps the most psychologically taxing opponents for a Grey Knight to face. Not because they are the most physically dangerous, although they are certainly formidable, but because they embody a philosophy that is in many ways the antithesis of everything the Grey Knights stand for. Nurgle preaches acceptance. Acceptance of decay, of entropy, of the inevitable decline that all things must undergo. His demons are bloated, diseased, rotting things that spread plague and pestilence wherever they go, but they do so with a cheerful, almost grandfatherly benevolence that makes their corruption all the more insidious. A Grey Knight facing a great unclean one, the greater demon of Nurgle, must contend not only with the creature's immense physical durability and its ability to spread supernatural diseases that can corrupt even blessed ceramite, but also with the psychic aura of despair and apathy that the creature projects. Nurgle's influence does not attack the mind with rage or temptation. It attacks with weariness, with the subtle suggestion that the fight is not worth fighting, that all things decay in the end, that even the Grey Knight's vaunted purity is merely a delay of the inevitable. For a warrior who has been fighting for centuries, who has seen comrades fall and victories turn to ash, this whispered counsel of surrender can be surprisingly potent. And then there are the forces of Slaanesh, the Dark Prince. If Nurgle's demons attack through despair, Slaanesh's attack through desire. They are creatures of terrible beauty and impossible sensation, designed to overwhelm the senses with stimulation so intense that the victim cannot think, cannot fight, cannot do anything except surrender to the experience. Keepers of secrets, the greater demons of Slaanesh, are perhaps the most dangerous opponents a Grey Knight can face one-on-one, not because they are the most physically powerful, but because they possess an almost supernatural ability to identify and exploit weakness. A keeper of secrets does not simply attack your body, it attacks your identity. It finds the things you care about, the things you fear, the things you desire, and it uses them against you with a precision that borders on the surgical. For a Grey Knight, whose identity has been stripped down and rebuilt from scratch specifically to eliminate vulnerabilities, a keeper of secrets represents the ultimate test. The demon will search for any crack, any flaw, any imperfection in the warrior's psychic armor, and when it finds one, it will pour every drop of its seductive power into that weakness. The fact that no Grey Knight has ever succumbed to this kind of assault is perhaps the greatest testament to the effectiveness of the chapter's training and the purity of the Emperor's gene seed. But the Grey Knights themselves will tell you that they do not take their record for granted. They know that each engagement with a keeper of secrets is a risk, a gamble that the training will hold, that the wards will function, that the warrior's soul is truly as pure as the chapter believes it to be. And they know that if one of them ever fails that test, the consequences would be catastrophic. There is also the matter of chaos undivided, the forces that serve no single god, but draw upon the power of all four simultaneously. Daemon princes, mortal beings who have been elevated to daemonic immortality through their service to chaos, represent some of the most dangerous opponents in the Grey Knight's catalogue, because unlike born demons, who are fundamentally alien to mortal consciousness, demon princes were once human, or at least mortal. They understand how mortal minds work because they once possessed mortal minds themselves. They know the weaknesses of human psychology because they once shared those weaknesses. And they have had centuries, sometimes millennia, to perfect the art of exploiting those weaknesses in the service of their dark patrons. The demon primarchs, the fallen sons of the Emperor, who have been fully transformed into demonic entities, represent the absolute apex of this threat. Beings like Angron, Mortarion, and Magnus the Red are creatures of godlike power, whose very existence is an affront to everything the Imperium stands for. Facing a demon primarch is not merely a military engagement. It is a metaphysical confrontation, a clash between the legacy of the Emperor and the corrupting power of chaos that can shake the foundations of reality itself. The Grey Knights have faced and banished multiple demon primarchs over their history, most notably Angron on Armageddon and Mortarion at Cornavin. But each such engagement has come at a staggering cost. And the Grey Knights approach these confrontations with full awareness that they may not survive. There is no guarantee of victory against a being of such power. There is only the determination to fight, the faith that the Emperor's gifts will be sufficient, and the willingness to die if necessary so that others may live. Let us also discuss in greater detail the Nemesis Dread Knight, for this weapon system represents one of the most remarkable pieces of military engineering in the Imperium, and deserves more than the brief mention we have given it so far. The Nemesis Dread Knight was developed specifically to address a tactical gap in the Grey Knight's capabilities. While individual Grey Knights, even those in Terminator armor, are extraordinarily powerful warriors, there are entities in the galaxy that simply outmatch them in terms of raw physical power. A bloodthirster of Khorne stands taller than a building, its muscles thick as tree trunks, its weapons carved from the crystallized essence of rage itself. A great unclean one is a mountain of corrupted flesh, whose sheer mass and resilience can absorb punishment that would destroy a battle tank. A keeper of secrets moves with such inhuman speed and grace that even the enhanced reflexes of a space marine can barely track its movements. To fight such creatures in close combat, which is often the only way to permanently banish them, a Grey Knight needs to be able to match them blow for blow. And that requires more physical power than even a Terminator armored warrior can bring to bear. The Nemesis Dread Knight provides that power. Standing roughly the same height as a dreadnought but far more agile, the Dread Knight is a suit of exo armor that amplifies the pilot's strength to levels that can match a greater demon's. The pilot is hardwired into the machine through a neural interface that translates his thoughts into the machine's movements with zero delay, allowing the Dread Knight to fight with the same instinctive fluidity as a warrior in conventional power armor, but at a vastly larger scale. The weapons the Dread Knight carries are scaled-up versions of the Grey Knight's standard armaments. Nemesis Doomfists, massive gauntlets fitted with psychoconductive circuitry, can crush a battle tank's hull with a single squeeze. The Nemesis Greatsword, a weapon the size of a small aircraft wing, can bisect a greater demon with a single properly placed swing. Heavy psi cannons and Gatling silencers mounted on the machine's frame provide devastating ranged firepower, and the Dread Knight's own Aegis, amplified by the machine's power systems, projects a zone of psychic resistance that can make demons physically recoil from its presence. Piloting a Dread Knight is an honor typically reserved for the Grey Knight's most skilled warriors, those who have demonstrated not only exceptional martial ability, but also the mental fortitude to maintain their psychic concentration, while simultaneously controlling a war machine of extraordinary complexity. The neural interface that connects the pilot to the Dread Knight is not a simple control system. It is a symbiotic link that merges the warrior's consciousness with the machine's systems, allowing him to feel the Dread Knight's limbs as if they were his own, to sense its weapons as extensions of his own body, to channel his psychic power through the machine's amplification circuits with the same ease as breathing. The Grand Master in Nemesis Dread Knight is the most formidable version of this war machine, combining the chapter's finest commander with its most powerful vehicle-scale weapons platform. A Grand Master Dread Knight is typically deployed only against the most extreme threats. Those situations where the enemy commander is a greater demon or demon prince of such power that no lesser force has any hope of defeating it. In these engagements, the Grandmaster Dread Knight serves as the tip of the spear, closing with the enemy's most dangerous unit and engaging it in single combat, while the rest of the strike force deals with the supporting elements. Yet there is something almost mythic about the image of a Grandmaster in a Nemesis Dread Knight facing down a greater demon. Two titans clashing on a battlefield stained with the blood of mortals, their weapons throwing off arcs of psychic energy that illuminate the surrounding carnage in alternating flashes of silver and corrupted light. The ground cracks beneath their feet. The air between them burns with released warp energy, and all around them, the fate of worlds hangs in the balance, decided not by armies or strategies, but by the courage and skill of two individual combatants locked in a duel that will determine whether this corner of the galaxy falls to darkness or remains in the light. It is these moments that define the Grey Knights more than any organizational chart or equipment list ever could. Are the moments when everything comes down to one warrior, one weapon, one act of defiance against the impossible. The moments when the Emperor's final gift is put to the ultimate test and must either prove itself worthy or fail in the attempt. Speaking of specific moments of defiance, let us return briefly to some campaigns and engagements that we have not yet discussed in detail, for the Grey Knight's 10,000-year history is rich with stories that deserve to be told. The Damned Voyage of 394 in the 40th Millennium is one of the most harrowing accounts of Grey Knight endurance in the chapter's records. The strike cruiser Titan's Hand suffered a catastrophic Geller field failure while traveling through the warp, leaving the warship completely unshielded against the predatory entities that dwell in the Imperium. Almost immediately, yet the ship was engulfed by demonic creatures hungry for the souls of those mortals on board. What happened next was a battle for survival of the most desperate kind. The Grey Knight stood haloed by psychic energy against the warp, each one shielding his mind and body through sheer willpower and the blessed seals of the Aegis. Against servitors and chapter serfs, turned into puppets of chaos, the Battle Brothers fought to reclaim their vessel. Room by room, corridor by corridor, they pushed back against the tide of demonic corruption that flooded through every deck. When the Titan's Hand finally made an emergency translation back into real space, the surviving Grey Knights stood in the midst of a command bridge covered in the remains of their unfortunate crew. Every human being on the ship who was not a Grey Knight had been killed, yet their souls consumed by the demons, or their bodies turned into vessels for demonic possession. Only the Grey Knights had survived, their aegis holding firm against the most direct and sustained demonic assault imaginable. This incident demonstrated something important about the Grey Knights' capabilities. They are not merely soldiers who fight demons on the battlefield. They are, in a very real sense, immune to the conditions that make demonic entities so dangerous. The warp itself, that roiling ocean of psychic energy that would destroy any unprotected mind in moments, cannot break them. They can stand in the raw, unfiltered substance of the immaterium and remain themselves. They can be surrounded by demons on all sides, cut off from any external support, exposed to the full force of chaos corruption, and they will not break. That they will not turn, they will not fall. This is the ultimate validation of the Emperor's design. This is the proof that the sacrifice of Malkador, the hiding of Titan, the creation of the gene seed, the brutal trials, and the memory erasure, and the silver wards, and the psychic training, all of it was worth the cost. Because it works. The system produces warriors who are, for all practical purposes, incorruptible. Warriors who can be trusted to go anywhere, face anything, and come back unchanged. Another notable engagement is the haunting of Titan itself, which occurred in 566 of the 35th Millennium. The chambers of purity within the citadel were sullied by haunting spectres of the warp, the ghosts of vanquished foes that clawed at the walls of reality and whispered portents of future catastrophe. These creatures warned of a time when the light of the Emperor would fail, and the Grey Knights would stand alone against the darkness. The fate of humanity resting upon the razor edges of their blades. The purifiers endured the maddened tirades of these ghosts and the visions of the Imperium fallen into darkness and fire. They knew that these shades were merely echoes of the monsters they pretended to be, barely connected to the warp and able to do no more than spread lies. But the purifiers also knew that the demonic ghosts were a symptom of something ancient and powerful that slumbers beneath the surface of Titan, something that even the Grey Knights themselves do not fully understand. This is one of the great mysteries of the Grey Knights' existence. What lies beneath Titan? The fortress monastery sits atop geological formations that predate the Imperium itself, and there are sealed chambers deep within the moon's crust that no living Grey Knight has ever entered. The wards that seal these chambers are among the oldest and most powerful in the Citadel, and they are maintained with obsessive care by the purifiers, whose sacred duty includes preventing anyone from accessing whatever is contained within. Speculation about the nature of this hidden threat is one of the few topics that the Grey Knights do not discuss openly, even among themselves. Some believe that Malcador sealed something within Titan during the founding, a weapon or entity of such terrible power that it could only be safely contained within the most heavily warded location in the galaxy. And others believe that the thing beneath Titan predates even the Emperor, that it is some ancient horror from the age before the Imperium that Malcador chose to build the Grey Knight's fortress directly on top of, reasoning that the chapter's combined psychic presence would serve as an additional layer of containment. Whatever the truth, the haunting of Titan served as a reminder that even the Grey Knight's home is not entirely safe. The war against the warp is not fought only on distant battlefields and corrupted worlds. It is fought every day within the walls of the Citadel itself, in the constant maintenance of wards, the renewal of seals, the vigilant monitoring of psychic activity that is the backdrop of every Grey Knight's daily existence. Let us also speak of Castellan Garin Crow and the Blade of Antwer, for their story encapsulates something essential about the Grey Knight's philosophy. The Blade of Antwer is a demon weapon. Within its metal, a demon of tremendous power is bound, trapped in an eternal prison of blessed steel and psychic wards. The demon is cunning and relentless, and it communicates constantly with whoever carries the blade, whispering temptations, offering power, promising glory and vengeance, and everything else that it believes its bearer desires. The demon within the blade has driven previous carriers to madness and corruption, their souls consumed by the entity they were supposed to guard. Garin Crow carries the blade because no one else can. His soul is so pure, his will so absolute, his resistance to corruption so complete that the demon's whispers fall upon him like rain upon stone. He does not wield the blade in battle. He does not draw upon its power. He does not even acknowledge the demon's existence except to maintain the wards that keep it contained. He carries it as a burden, a sacred trust, a duty that he has accepted because someone must and because he alone is qualified. In combat, Crow fights with ordinary Grey Knight weapons, ignoring the demon weapon that hangs at his side and the constant stream of temptation that flows from it. This is, in many ways, a more impressive feat of willpower than any battlefield victory. A warrior who defeats a demon in combat does so in a moment of supreme effort, a burst of adrenaline and psychic power that carries him through the crisis. Crow's burden is not momentary, it is constant, every second of every day for decades on end, and he endures the demon's influence without wavering. There is no rest, there is no relief, there is only the weight of the blade and the whispered promises that never stop. When Crow was challenged by Skulltaker, the demonic herald of Khorne, on the Black Planet, the Blade of Antwer tried desperately to convince Crow to let it speak to the rival daemon, to let it join the fight, to let it taste blood just once. Crow refused. He fought Skulltaker with his own skill and his own weapons, and though he could not defeat the herald in direct combat, he bought enough time for his brothers to complete their mission and foil the demon's plans. Crow's story is the Grey Knight's story in miniature. A warrior who carries a burden he did not choose, who fights a battle that never ends, who endures suffering that would destroy a lesser soul, and who does it all without complaint, without recognition, and without any expectation of reward. He does it because it must be done, because someone must carry the blade, because the alternative, allowing the demon within to escape its prison, is unthinkable. This is what the Grey Knights are, not merely warriors, guardians, sentinels, living seals against the darkness, each one a ward in human form, standing between the Imperium and the nightmares that press against the walls of reality from the other side. And in the end, that is perhaps the most remarkable thing about the Grey Knights. Not their power, though their power is immense. Not their weapons, though their weapons are among the finest in the galaxy. Not their psychic abilities, though those abilities are matched by no other force in the Imperium. Yet the most remarkable thing about the Grey Knights is their willingness to carry a burden that would crush anyone else, and to carry it in silence, without recognition, for as long as it needs to be carried. That is what it means to become a Grey Knight. That is the path. From a boy, plucked from obscurity, through the fires of the most demanding trials in the galaxy, through the surgical transformation and the psychic awakening and the memory erasure and the years of training, to a warrior who stands at the very forefront of humanity's war against the darkness. A warrior who knows that his name will never be spoken outside the halls of Titan, whose deeds will never be celebrated in the songs of ordinary men, whose sacrifice will never be acknowledged by the civilization he has given everything to protect. A warrior who accepts all of this, and fights anyway, because that is what the Emperor asked of him, and because, in the end, someone must. Before we draw this exploration to a close, it is worth pausing to consider the Grey Knight's relationship with the broader community of Space Marine chapters, because this relationship is far more complicated than one might expect. Most Space Marine chapters are, at best, vaguely aware that the Grey Knights exist. The vast majority know nothing at all. Those that have encountered the Grey Knights in battle typically have their memories of the encounter modified or erased by the Inquisition afterward, leaving them with fragments and half-remembered impressions that eventually fade into the background noise of a long career of warfare. The few chapters that maintain an active awareness of the Grey Knight's existence generally do so because they occupy positions of sufficient power and influence within the Imperium that the Inquisition has judged the cost of maintaining their ignorance to be greater than the cost of allowing them to know the truth. The Death Watch, the Ordo Xenos' chamber militant, has a particularly interesting relationship with the Grey Knights. Both organizations serve the Inquisition. Both recruit from the broader pool of Space Marine talent. Both operate in the shadows, conducting missions that the general populace of the Imperium will never learn about. But the Death Watch and the Grey Knights approach their missions from fundamentally different angles. The Death Watch is a coalition force, assembled from warriors seconded by dozens of different chapters, each one bringing his own traditions and perspectives to the shared mission of alien hunting. The Grey Knights are a single, unified chapter, with a single mission and a single identity, every member drawn from the same gene seed and trained in the same traditions. There is mutual respect between the two organizations, but also a certain wariness. The Grey Knights are aware that the Death Watch has access to information and resources that could be useful to their own mission, while the Death Watch recognizes that the Grey Knights possess capabilities that no other force in the Imperium can match. Cooperation between the two is rare but not unheard of, particularly in situations where a threat involves both Xenos and demonic elements, and as can occur during encounters with certain tyrannid bioforms that demonstrate psychic abilities or Necron devices that interact with the warp in unexpected ways. The relationship with the Space Wolves, as discussed earlier, remains one of the most fraught in the Grey Knight's history. The aftermath of the First War for Armageddon created a rift between the two chapters that has never been fully healed. Logan Grimnar views the Grey Knights as willing executioners of innocent people, while the Grey Knights view the Space Wolves as dangerously naive about the realities of the war against chaos. Both perspectives contain elements of truth, which is precisely why the disagreement has proven so intractable. More recently, the return of Reboot Guilliman, the Primarch of the Ultramarines, has created new dynamics for the Grey Knights. A Guilliman, as Lord Commander of the Imperium, possesses authority that supersedes even the Inquisition in many matters. His awareness of the Grey Knights' existence and his attitude toward their methods is a subject of significant interest within the chapter, particularly given his known disapproval of certain inquisitorial practices. The Grey Knights have cooperated with Guilliman's forces on multiple occasions since his return, particularly during the Indomitus Crusade. But the long-term implications of having a Primarch actively engaged in imperial governance remain uncertain. There is a passage in the lore that speaks to the very heart of what separates the Grey Knights from every other warrior in the Imperium, and it concerns the concept known as the Emperor's Gift. The phrase carries a deliberate double meaning. On one level, it refers to the gene seed itself, the biological legacy of the Emperor that flows through every Grey Knight's veins and grants them their extraordinary psychic abilities and resistance to corruption. The Grey Knights do not call their gene seed by the same name that other chapters use. They do not speak of their Primarch because they have no Primarch. They speak instead of the Emperor's Gift, a name that is not given in jest but in absolute sincerity, a reminder that what they carry within their bodies is not the diluted inheritance of a middleman, but the direct, unfiltered genetic legacy of the master of mankind himself. On another level, the Emperor's Gift refers to the Grey Knights themselves, to the chapter as a whole, to the fact of their existence. They are the Emperor's gift to humanity. His final act of creation before the Golden Throne consumed what remained of his mortal existence and bound him to an eternity of silent suffering. In the last hours before the heresy consumed everything, while the traitors hammered at the gates of the imperial palace and the sky above Terra burned with the light of orbital bombardment, the Emperor found time to set one last piece in motion. He gathered the genetic material that would become the Grey Knight's gene seed. He shared his vision with Malcador. He gave his instructions, knowing that he would not live to see them carried out. He identified the 8 warriors who would serve as the founding Grand Masters of the chapter, 8 souls of extraordinary purity, drawn from across the legions Astartes, some from loyal legions, and at least one, Epimetheus, from among the ranks of the traitorous Dark Angels, successor force known as the Fallen. These 8 were selected not for their allegiance or their legion affiliation, but for the quality of their souls, for the brightness of the inner light that burned within them. They were diverse in origin, but united in purpose, and together they would form the nucleus around which the entire Grey Knights chapter would be built. Malcador took these 8 warriors and hundreds of others, gathered them upon Titan, and then performed his final and most demanding act of sorcery, dragging the entire moon into the warp and hiding it from the eyes of gods and mortals alike until the heresy had burned itself out and the surviving Imperium could begin the long, painful process of rebuilding. And then he turned back to the war, leaving the future of his greatest creation in the hands of a mortal man who was already dying from the strain of sitting upon the Golden Throne in his master's absence. Think about what that says about the Emperor's priorities. In the most desperate moment of his entire existence, facing the very real possibility that everything he had built would be destroyed, the Emperor chose to spend some of his final hours of freedom ensuring that a demon hunting force would exist to protect humanity in the millennia to come. He did not know whether the Imperium would survive the heresy. He did not know whether Horus would be defeated. He did not even know whether Malcador would live long enough to carry out his instructions. But he did it anyway, because he understood something that many of his own sons did not. He understood that the war against chaos was not a war that could be won with fleets and armies and planetary bombardments. It was a war that required a specialized weapon, a weapon forged specifically for the task of fighting the enemy at its own level, on its own terms, with tools that no other force in the galaxy possessed. The Emperor understood that the Chaos Gods could not be defeated by force alone. They are not armies to be conquered or territories to be occupied. They are concepts. They are the dark reflections of sentient emotion, the negative space that exists wherever feeling and thought and consciousness create ripples in the fabric of the warp. As long as sentient beings exist, as long as they feel rage and despair and desire and hope, the Chaos Gods will exist. They cannot be killed. They cannot be starved. And they cannot be negotiated with or appeased or contained in any permanent sense. What can be done is to fight their servants, to banish the demons they send to corrupt the material world, to close the portals they open between their realm and ours, to hunt down the mortal followers who serve as the advance guard of demonic invasion, to maintain, through constant, unrelenting, unflagging effort, the barrier between the warp and the material universe that keeps the nightmare at bay. This is the war the Emperor created the Grey Knights to fight. Not a war of conquest, not a war that can end in victory or defeat, a war of maintenance, a war of containment, an eternal vigil against an enemy that will never stop pressing against the walls of reality, looking for weaknesses, probing for cracks, ours searching for the moment when the defenders falter and the floodgates open. It is a bleak and thankless mission. There is no end state. There is no finish line. There is no moment when the Grey Knights can lay down their weapons and say that their work is done. The work will never be done. The war will never be won. The best that can be achieved is a kind of dynamic equilibrium, a state where the forces of the warp are held in check by the constant vigilance of those who stand against them, where each incursion is met and repelled before it can achieve critical mass, where the darkness is kept at arm's length through the application of sufficient force and sufficient faith. This is what the Grey Knights do, every day, every year, every century, every millennium. For 10,000 years they have maintained this vigil, and for 10,000 more they will continue to maintain it, or until the last Grey Knight falls and there is no one left to hold the line. Let us also discuss in greater detail the secrecy that surrounds the Grey Knights, because this aspect of their existence carries profound implications for their psychology and their relationship with the broader Imperium. The Grey Knights operate under the highest level of classification that the Imperium maintains. Their existence is known only to the Inquisition, to certain senior members of the Adeptus Terra, and to a handful of other individuals whose positions require them to be aware of the chapter's role. The general populace of the Imperium has never heard of the Grey Knights. Even most Space Marine chapters are unaware of their existence, or at best possess only fragmentary rumors and legends about a mysterious force of silver-armored warriors who appear in times of dire demonic threat and disappear just as quickly. This secrecy is not merely a matter of operational security, it is a fundamental pillar of the Grey Knights' effectiveness. The Imperium's official position on demons is one of deliberate ambiguity. The existence of the warp is acknowledged, because it cannot be denied given the Imperium's reliance on warp travel and psychic communication. But the specific nature of the entities that dwell within the warp, the fact that they are intelligent, malevolent beings capable of manifesting in the material world, is information that the Inquisition considers too dangerous for general dissemination. The reasoning behind this policy is straightforward, even if morally uncomfortable. Knowledge of demons creates vulnerability to daemons. A person who knows that daemons exist is, by that very knowledge, more susceptible to daemonic corruption than a person who does not. This is not simply a matter of psychology, though psychology plays a role. It is a function of how the warp works. The warp responds to thought and emotion. A mind that contains the concept of daemons is a mind that generates psychic resonance around that concept, and that resonance can attract the very entities it fears. Ignorance, in this case, is genuinely protective. This is why the Grey Knights enforce their secrecy with such ruthless efficiency. When a demonic incursion occurs, and conventional Imperial forces are involved. The aftermath typically involves the systematic elimination or mind-wiping of everyone who witnessed the event. Imperial Guard regiments who fought alongside the Grey Knights have been sterilized and placed in forced labor camps. Entire planetary populations have been subjected to mass memory erasure, or, in extreme cases, exterminatus. The Grey Knights do not enjoy this aspect of their duty, but they accept it as a necessary cost, just as they accept the deaths of aspirants in the Chamber of Trials and the loss of battle brothers on the battlefield. The psychological toll of this secrecy is difficult to quantify, but impossible to ignore. Grey Knights live in a state of permanent isolation from the rest of humanity, unable to share the details of their existence with anyone outside their own ranks and the Inquisition. Whilst they cannot form relationships with ordinary humans because any such relationship would eventually require either lies or the kind of truth-telling that would compromise operational security. They cannot even maintain normal relationships with other Space Marines, who may or may not know of their existence, and who, if they learned the full truth of what the Grey Knights do, might react with horror, revulsion, or the kind of uncomfortable questions that the Inquisition would prefer not to answer. This isolation is compounded by the memory erasure that all Grey Knights undergo during their initial training. Unlike other Space Marines, who retain at least some connection to their lives before transformation, Grey Knights have no pre-chapter identity to fall back on. They cannot reminisce about their childhood. They cannot wonder what became of their families. They cannot draw comfort from the memory of a warm hearth or a mother's embrace on a cold night. All of that has been taken from them, stripped away as thoroughly as if it had never existed. What remains is the chapter, the brotherhood, the mission, and the quiet companionship of warriors who share the same burden and understand the same truths. It is a stark existence, austere in a way that goes beyond mere discipline or military rigor. The Grey Knights' lives are defined not by what they have, but by what they have given up, not by what they enjoy, but by what they endure. There is no luxury in the citadel of Titan, no entertainment, no art, beyond the battle honors and devotional iconography that adorn the fortress's walls. No music, beyond the hymns and litanies that accompany their rituals. No companionship, beyond the bonds of brotherhood that connect them to their fellow warriors. Their existence is pared down to its absolute essentials, stripped of everything that does not directly serve the mission, leaving only the core functions of a being designed for a single, unending purpose. And yet, within this austerity, there is something that might be called beauty. Not the beauty of comfort or pleasure or aesthetic delight, but the beauty of absolute commitment. The beauty of a thing that is perfectly suited to its purpose, that has been refined and polished and shaped by 10,000 years of continuous improvement, until every unnecessary element has been removed, and only the essential remains. There is a purity to the Grey Knight's existence that is, in its own way, almost transcendent. A warrior who has given up everything, who has nothing left to lose and nothing left to want, who exists solely for the purpose of protecting others from a threat they will never know about, possesses a kind of freedom that is inaccessible to those who are still burdened by desire and attachment and the 1,000 distractions of ordinary human life. This is not to romanticize the Grey Knights' suffering. Their sacrifice is real and their pain is genuine, but it is to acknowledge that within the suffering there is something worth respecting, something worth admiring, something that speaks to the best qualities of the human spirit, even when that spirit is encased in ceramite armor and wielding a weapon forged from psychic fire. The Grey Knights are not saints. Well, they are not paragons of uncomplicated virtue. They enforce a secrecy that costs innocent lives. They make decisions that would horrify most moral philosophers. They serve a system, the Inquisition and the Imperium at large, that is deeply flawed, often cruel, and frequently unjust. But within the constraints of the universe they inhabit, within the grim calculus of a galaxy where the alternatives are always worse, they do the best they can with what they have been given. They fight the fights that no one else can fight. They carry the burdens that no one else can carry. And they do it all without asking for thanks or recognition or the simple human courtesy of being acknowledged. There is one more thing that should be said about the Grey Knights before we bring this journey to a close. And it concerns the nature of the threat they face in the current era. The opening of the Great Rift, that vast wound in reality that tore the galaxy in half, has changed the nature of the war against chaos in ways that are still being understood. Demonic incursions that were once rare and isolated events are now occurring with terrifying frequency across huge swathes of Imperial space. Worlds that were once safely removed from the influence of the warp now find themselves pressed up against the very edge of the rift, their atmospheres crackling with psychic static, and their populations experiencing mass hallucinations and psychotic episodes as the barriers between reality and the Imperium begin to thin. For the Grey Knights, this escalation has been catastrophic, not because they lack the ability to fight the increased number of threats, but because they lack the numbers. A chapter of approximately 1,000 warriors, spread across a galaxy that contains billions of worlds, simply cannot respond to every incursion. Priorities must be set, choices must be made, and those choices mean that some worlds will burn, some populations will be consumed, some threats will go unanswered because the Grey Knights are needed elsewhere. The loss of multiple Grand Masters in the Dark Imperium, the half of the galaxy cut off from the light of the Astronomicon by the Great Rift, has further strained the chapter's leadership. The chapter council, which normally consists of the 8 Grand Masters plus the Supreme Grand Master, is operating at reduced capacity. Yes, with several seats either empty or filled by warriors who were promoted under emergency circumstances and have not yet had time to grow into their roles. Combined with the ongoing absence of Supreme Grand Master Drygo, who remains trapped in the realm of chaos, the chapter's command structure is under more strain than at any point since the founding. And yet, the Grey Knights endure. They adapt. They find new ways to stretch their diminished resources across an expanding theater of operations. They accept losses that would have been considered unacceptable in calmer times. They push their warriors harder, deploy them more aggressively, take risks that they would normally avoid, all because the alternative, the withdrawal of their protection from even a fraction of the worlds that depend on it, is unthinkable. This is the crucible in which the Grey Knights currently find themselves. Not a single dramatic battle or a climactic confrontation with a named villain, but a slow, grinding war of attrition against an enemy that has more resources, more numbers, and more patience than they do. It is a war that they cannot win in the traditional sense. They can only survive it, day by day, battle by battle, soul by soul, holding the line through sheer determination and the refusal to accept that the situation is hopeless. And perhaps that is the most important lesson that the Grey Knights have to teach us about the Warhammer 40,000 universe. Not the lesson about psychic power or demon-hunting tactics or the mechanics of gene seed implantation, but the lesson about what it means to fight a war that you know you cannot win, yet to accept a duty that you know will never end, to carry a burden that you know will eventually crush you, and to do it anyway, not because you are ordered to, not because you are programmed to, but because you have chosen to, because you have looked into the darkness and decided that someone needs to stand against it, and that someone might as well be you. That choice, made fresh every day by every Grey Knight who straps on his Aegis armor and takes up his nemesis weapon and walks out to face the nightmares that lurk beyond the veil of reality, is the truest expression of what it means to be a defender of humanity. It is not glamorous. It is not romantic. It is not the stuff of triumphant ballads or inspirational speeches. It is quiet, and it is grim, and it is thankless, and it is absolutely essential. Without the Grey Knights, the Imperium would fall. Not in a dramatic, spectacular collapse, but in a slow, creeping corruption that would eat away at the foundations of human civilization until there was nothing left but empty husks and the laughter of entities that should never have been allowed to touch the material world. The Grey Knights are the antibodies in the Imperium's bloodstream, the white cells that identify and destroy infections before they can spread beyond containment. They are small in number, Few would even know if they ceased to exist, but their absence would be felt in every corner of the galaxy within a generation. This is their legacy. This is their purpose. This is the fire that burns within the silver armor and behind the psychic wards, and inside the hearts of warriors who have forgotten their own names, but who will never forget why they fight. To become a Grey Knight is to accept all of this. Every aspect of it. The pain and the isolation and the secrecy and the endless, grinding war that will never produce a final victory. It is to look at the hardest road any human being can walk and choose to walk it anyway, knowing full well that the road has no end, and that the only reward waiting at the end of your service is a patch of frozen earth on the surface of Titan, and a name carved in stone that no one outside the chapter will ever read. It is, by any reasonable standard, an impossible ask. It demands too much. It takes too much. It gives too little in return. And yet, as century after century, millennium after millennium, there are those who answer the call. Boys plucked from worlds across the galaxy, tested in the most demanding trials ever devised, transformed by the Emperor's own genetic legacy into something more than human, and sent out into the darkness to fight the enemies that the rest of humanity is blissfully unaware even exist. They are the Grey Knights, the demon hunters of Titan, the Emperor's gift to a galaxy that does not know their name. And as long as they endure, as long as a single battle brother stands with silver blade in hand, and the Emperor's fire burning in his soul, the darkness will not prevail. That is the promise. That is the covenant. That is the truth that lies at the heart of everything the Grey Knights are and everything they will ever be. The Emperor protects. Well, and the Grey Knights are how he does it. Thank you so much for staying with me through this deep and thorough exploration of the Grey Knights and the extraordinary journey of becoming one of the Emperor's demon hunters. If you found this video immersive and engaging, please take just a moment to hit that like button. It costs you nothing, but it makes an enormous difference to the growth of the channel and helps me continue producing these detailed explorations of the Warhammer 40,000 universe. If you have not already subscribed to Q on 40,000, now is a wonderful time to do so. Hit that subscribe button and click the bell icon so you never miss a new upload. There are so many more stories to tell, so many more factions and characters and campaigns to explore, and I would love nothing more than to have you along for every single one of them. Drop a comment below and tell me what topic you would like me to dive into next. Your suggestions genuinely shape the direction of the channel, and every comment helps the algorithm bring these videos to people who would enjoy them. Until next time, take care of yourselves out there. Stay safe, stay curious, and remember, no matter how dark things get, the Emperor protects.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any, and yeah, sleep well.